The vault 3 levels beneath the regime compound smelled like burnt metal and old mistakes. Clark stood in the observation chamber, arms crossed, watching technicians catalog what remained of the raid on the Intergang cache. Most of it was junk. Alien firearms that wouldn't fire. Kryptonian relics, too damaged to matter. But there on the center platform under white light sat something different. The mother box was smaller than he'd expected. Cube-shaped, maybe 8 inches per side, its surface shifting between bronze and something that wasn't quite metal. Faint geometric patterns crawled across it like living circuitry. No hum, no glow, just the occasional pulse that made the air taste like copper. "Apocalypse Tech," Victor said through the intercom, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Authenticated. The cult we raided was trying to reverse engineer it. They failed." Clark didn't look away from the box. "Can we use it?" A pause, long enough to notice. "For what? Permanent exile?" Clark's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Like ordering coffee. Phantom Zone anchors require prisoner ID. Too many variables, too much maintenance. This," he gestured at the box, "this opens doors, one-way doors." Victor's hologram flickered into the chamber. Half his face was human tired. The other half was smooth chrome, unreadable. "You're talking about dimensional deportation." "I'm talking about variables we can't contain." Clark turned to face him. "The ones who slip through trials. The ones prison can't hold. The ones we can't—" He stopped, reworded. "The ones who leave us no choice." Victor's human eye narrowed. "You mean the ones you don't want to kill?" "Yes." The word hung there, honest, terrible. Diana's voice cut through before Victor could respond. She'd been standing in the corner so still, Clark had almost forgotten her presence. "It's practical," she said, stepping into the light. Her armor caught the fluorescence wrong too sharp. "A scalpel instead of a sword? Exile instead of execution. The optics are cleaner." Clark glanced at her. Diana met his gaze steady, certain. No doubt in those eyes. There never was any more. "I'll need authorization to proceed," Victor said. "You have it?" Clark's tone left no room for debate. "Run the preliminary tests, discrete protocols only. No network integration until I say otherwise." Victor's hologram dissolved without acknowledgement. Not quite insubordination, just exhaustion wearing the shape of compliance. Diana waited until the intercom light died. "Bruce will object." "Bruce objects to everything. He'll call it tyranny with better PR." Clark turned back to the mother box. Its surface pulsed once, twice like a heartbeat made of math. "He can call it whatever he wants. He's not the one who has to make decisions for 8 billion people. He'll interfere. He already is." Clark's jaw tightened. "But he doesn't have access to this facility, and he won't know about the tests until they're complete." Diana nodded, said nothing. Agreement didn't need words anymore. 12 hours later, in a sub-level lab built to contain breaches, Victor ran the first test. The mother box sat inside a Phantom Zone containment field, triple-layered, each membrane calibrated to different frequencies. Standard procedure for unknown tech. Except this wasn't standard, and Victor knew it. His cybernetic half was already flagging anomalies before the system powered up. Dimensional harmonics that didn't match any known signature. Energy readings that pulsed in rhythms no machine should recognize as patterns. He activated the test sequence anyway. The mother box opened space like tearing fabric. Not a portal, not a tunnel, a wound. Reality folded wrong edges, bleeding colors that didn't have names, and through the gap came a sound like pressure equalizing across dimensions. Every sensor in the lab screamed warnings. Every readout showed the same thing: null, undefined, cannot classify. Victor's hands moved through shutdown protocols, but the box wasn't listening. It was answering something, some frequency he couldn't hear, couldn't measure, couldn't stop. The rift stabilized. Wrong, but stable. And somewhere above Metropolis, where the sky should have been empty, a man with a bald head and a yellow suit fell through a hole in the world grocery bag, still clutched in one hand. The impact cracked the pavement. Not violently, just factually. Like physics remembering itself after a brief vacation. Saitama stood up, looked around at a city that wasn't his, and frowned at the bag in his hand. One of the eggs was broken. "Great," he said to no one in particular. "Just great." 3 miles away in the sub-level lab, Victor stared at his screens. Every single one displayed the same message, looping: insistent, impossible, unknown entity detected. Classification failed. Signature null. He reached for the emergency channel to Batman. His finger hovered over the call button. Then he thought about the consequences. About what the regime would do if they knew he'd bypassed their protocols. About what they'd do if they didn't know. His hand moved to a different panel instead. One that didn't route through official networks. One that only Bruce would recognize. The message was 3 words: "We have a problem." He deleted it, rewrote it, sent it encrypted through 6 proxies before it finally reached the insurgency's dead-drop server. By then, Saitama had already walked 3 blocks looking for a convenience store that took whatever currency this dimension used, and the regime's automated surveillance grid had flagged him 17 times as an unidentified meta. Clark was in a briefing when the alerts hit his HUD. He excused himself, pulled up the feeds, saw a bald man in a cape checking prices on instant noodles. His eyes narrowed. Diana joined him in the hallway, reading his expression. "Problem. Unknown variable," Clark said quietly. "Metropolis. Downtown. No ID, no heat signature match, no metagene marker. Insurgent. Unknown." He pulled up the surveillance angles, watched the man put the noodles back, pick up a different brand. Normal. Completely, aggressively normal. He came through right after the mother box test. Diana's hand moved to her sword hilt. Instinct. Coincidence? Clark watched the man finally give up on shopping and just stand there staring at the sky like he was trying to figure out which way was home. "No," Clark said. "Send a team. Minimal force. I want him contained, not engaged." Diana nodded and was gone. Clark stayed in the hallway watching the feeds, watching the man who shouldn't exist stand perfectly still in the middle of a city that was learning to fear stillness. The mother box, 3 miles below, pulsed once in its containment field. Its surface showed symbols that cycled too fast to read. But if someone had been watching, if someone had known the old languages of apocalypse, they would have seen the same word over and over: insufficient data. Recalculating. Error. The universe was trying to classify Saitama. It was failing. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, something old and patient and red felt the framework crack just enough to put a finger through. The plaza had been cleaned that morning. Scrubbed, surveilled, safe. Now it was a theater, and everyone knew their role. 300 civilians formed a loose semicircle around the detention zone, kept back by waist-high barriers and the unspoken threat of drones overhead. They didn't cheer, didn't chant, just watched with the careful blankness of people who'd learned that attention could be dangerous. Clark descended through morning light cape, settling behind him like a closing argument. He touched down 15 feet from the barriers, boots meeting concrete without sound. The crowd's silence deepened. Not awe. Something colder. Diana landed to his right sword, already drawn. Hal manifested on the left emerald constructs, spinning lazy orbits around his fists. The formation was deliberate, theatrical, a reminder that the regime didn't ask, didn't negotiate, didn't require your consent to keep you safe. In the center of the plaza, surrounded by autonomous weapons platforms and hard light containment markers, stood a man with a bald head and a yellow costume that looked like it cost $30. Saitama was examining a parking meter. Target acquired. A drone announced, its voice flat and artificial. Unidentified meta. Non-compliant with regime registration protocols. Probability of hostile intent calculating. Clark's HUD fed him data. No heat signature match. No biometric markers. No match to any known meta gene profile in the global database. The man simply existed outside every framework they'd built to measure threat. "Sir," Hal said quietly, constructs tightening. "Want me to box him?" "Not yet." Clark's voice carried across the plaza, designed to be heard, designed to remind everyone who spoke for order here. "You, step forward." Saitama looked up from the parking meter. His face held the expression of someone trying to figure out if they'd parked in a tow zone. "Me." "Step forward, slowly, hands visible." For a moment, Saitama just stared. Then he shrugged and walked toward them, hands in his pockets, posture so relaxed it almost looked like contempt. The weapons platforms tracked his movement. Hal's constructs flared brighter. Diana's grip shifted on her sword. Clark didn't move, didn't need to. "Remove your hands from your pockets." Saitama stopped 10 feet away, pulled his hands out. Empty. "Okay. Now what?" "Identification." "Don't have any. Lost my wallet somewhere between wherever I was and here." Clark's jaw tightened. The man's tone wasn't hostile, wasn't afraid. Just mildly inconvenienced, like he'd taken a wrong turn and needed directions. "Name." "Saitama." "Designation." A pause. "What?" "Hero name, alias, operational call sign." "Oh." Saitama scratched his head. "I mean, some people call me Caped Baldy, but I don't really." "Planet of origin." That stopped him. Saitama's expression shifted not toward fear or aggression, but toward the look of someone realizing they'd wandered into the wrong conversation entirely. "Earth," he said like it was a question. "I think everything looks similar but wrong." Diana stepped forward. "Similar how?" "Buildings are taller. More drones. Everyone looks scared." He glanced at the crowd, then back at Clark. "Are you in charge here?" "Yes." "Huh." Saitama looked him up and down, expression utterly neutral. "You should probably work on the vibe. People seem pretty tense." The plaza went quieter. Someone in the crowd made a sound quickly stifled. Hal's constructs stopped spinning. Clark's eyes narrowed. "You're unregistered. You matched no known meta profile. You appeared in controlled airspace without authorization. Standard protocol requires..." "Look," Saitama interrupted. "I don't know what happened. One second I'm going to the store, next second I'm falling through some kind of hole, and now I'm here and my eggs are broken. And I just want to figure out how to get home." Diana's sword rose an inch. "You claim dimensional displacement. I claim I was buying groceries, and now I'm not." His tone didn't change, didn't sharpen, just stayed at that same level of mild, persistent inconvenience. "So, if you know how to fix that, great. If not, I'll just keep looking." He turned to leave. "Stop!" Clark's voice dropped to command frequency, the kind that expected obedience because it always received it. Saitama kept walking. "Final warning." "Yeah, heard you." Saitama waved without looking back. "I'll get out of your way." Clark moved, not flight, not speed that gave opponents time to register threat. One moment he was 15 feet back, the next, his hand was coming down toward Saitama's shoulder, with enough force to crater concrete to remind this stranger that power here had a face, and that face was his. Saitama caught the strike one-handed. No stance, no preparation. Just lifted his left hand and stopped Clark's descending grip with his palm. The impact made no sound, produced no shockwave. The air didn't crack. Reality didn't protest. Physics just quietly edited itself and moved on. Clark stared at his own hand caught mid-strike, held in place by fingers that weren't glowing, weren't trembling, weren't doing anything except existing in the space where his certainty used to be. Heavy, Saitama said, like commenting on weather. Then he redirected. Not a throw, not a counter, just a gentle push angled down and to the left, and suddenly all that kinetic energy had somewhere else to be. The force traveled through Saitama's arm into the ground, spreading outward in a wave that cracked pavement in a perfect radial pattern. Spiderweb fractures raced across the plaza. Parking meters tilted. Manhole covers rattled. But nobody flew. Nobody died. The crowd stumbled but stayed standing. Saitama had redirected a Kryptonian strike into the earth itself, and he'd done it with the casual precision of someone flicking away a mosquito. Clark pulled back, created distance. His mind was already calculating, recalibrating, measuring this new variable against every threat assessment model he'd built over 6 years of absolute control. The models returned nothing useful. How? Containment. Green light erupted. Hal threw everything into it, emerald geometries layering over each other, building a cage of hard light around Saitama. Walls 10 feet thick, interlocking barriers, pressure seals that could hold atmosphere against vacuum. Saitama stood inside the green box, looking around with the expression of someone stuck in an elevator. Diana, execute suppression protocol 7. She moved like war made elegant. Lasso in her left, hand sword in her right, closing the distance in 3 strides. The lasso wrapped Saitama's torso, golden light flaring as divine truth met whatever this stranger was. The lasso held for 2 seconds. Then it went slack, not cut, not broken, just slack, like it had forgotten what binding meant. Diana pulled. The lasso came free, coiling in her hands, and for the first time in years, Clark saw uncertainty flash across her face. "Clark," Hal said, strain evident in his voice. "The cage isn't registering him. It's like trying to hold smoke. The light just..." The green lattice shattered, not exploded, not punched through, just stopped being real. The hard light dissolved into emerald particles, and Saitama stood exactly where he'd been looking, increasingly annoyed. "I already said I'll leave," he said. "Why are you making this complicated?" Clark's HUD was screaming. Every sensor locked on target showed the same reading null data. Cannot classify. Insufficient information. Error. The drones opened fire. Autonomous decision. Threat protocol. Rubber bullets and shock rounds. Non-lethal deterrence for someone who just casually dismantled their primary containment options. The rounds hit Saitama and bounced off. Didn't penetrate. Didn't even leave marks. Just ricocheted away like rain off stone, and his costume didn't so much as wrinkle. He looked at the drones, then at Clark. Really? Clark made a decision. The kind he'd been making for 6 years. The kind that kept the world spinning. The kind that required certainty, even when certainty was a lie you told yourself. The plaza held its breath. Even the drones seemed to pause. He flew, full speed, full force. The kind of strike that had put doomsday down, that had cracked mountains, that represented the terminal authority of a man who could end debates by ending physics. Saitama raised one hand. Palm out, casual, like hailing a taxi. Clark hit that palm, and the world inverted. The shockwave didn't explode outward. It couldn't. Saitama's hand was doing something impossible. Something that made Clark's strike fold in on itself, redirecting the force down, through his arm, through his body into the ground beneath his feet. The plaza buckled. Cracks raced toward the barriers. Windows in nearby buildings spider-webbed. But the barriers held. The crowd held. No one was blown away by the collision of two forces that should have leveled city blocks. Saitama had contained the impact to a 10-foot radius, and he was looking at Clark with an expression that was somehow worse than anger. Boredom. "Are we done?" Saitama asked. Clark hung there, hands still pressed against that impossibly casual palm, and for the first time since he'd decided the world needed someone strong enough to keep it safe, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Doubt, not about the regime. Not about his mission. About himself. About whether the strength he'd built everything on was actually enough. The crowd was watching. 300 faces locked on this moment. This tableau. Their protector, their symbol of absolute power, stopped mid-strike by a man in a discount costume who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Clark pulled back. Created space. His voice, when it came, was perfectly controlled. "Take him." Regime enforcers moved in. Specialized units trained to handle meta-threats. They surrounded Saitama with shock batons and containment foam professional coordinated exactly what you'd expect from an authoritarian state that had optimized violence into procedure. Saitama sighed. Then he walked forward, not through them, just forward. And somehow, impossibly, they couldn't stop him. Shock batons bounced off. Containment foam slid away. He moved through their formation like it wasn't there, like they weren't there, and his face held no triumph, no satisfaction. Just the quiet frustration of someone who'd missed the sale at the grocery store. "I'm going to keep looking for a way home," he said, not to Clark, not to Diana, just to the air. "Try not to get in my way." He walked past the barriers. The crowd parted. Not out of fear, out of something else. Something that looked almost like hope reflected in eyes that had forgotten what that felt like. And Clark stood in the center of the plaza, surrounded by his forces, his weapons, his absolute control, watching a man in a yellow cape disappear into the city. The drones tracked him. The surveillance grid locked on. Every sensor in Metropolis reported his position with perfect accuracy, but none of them could tell Clark what he was. Diana landed beside him. Orders. Clark stared at the spot where Saitama had vanished around a corner. His hands were steady. His voice was steady. Everything about him projected the certainty that had kept this world from tearing itself apart. "Find him," he said. "Contain him. I don't care how." Somewhere in the crowd, someone took out their phone. Started recording. The footage would be everywhere in an hour. Superman stopped. Superman challenged. Superman unable to enforce order against a man who just wanted to go home. The mythology was cracking, and in the sub-levels of the Batcave, Bruce Wayne watched the whole thing on screens that officially didn't exist and began calculating what it meant when your worst fear and your best hope wore the same face. Bruce Wayne had been tracking the anomaly for 47 minutes when his systems finally admitted they had no idea what they were looking at. The Batcave's primary analysis suite occupied an entire wall of crystalline displays, each one running different threat assessment protocols. Biometric scans, energy signatures, predictive modeling. Right now, every single monitor showed variations on the same message, insufficient data. He'd watched the plaza encounter 3 times. Once at normal speed, once frame by frame, once with every sensor overlay the surveillance grid could provide. The conclusion remained consistent. Saitama, the name from Clark's initial interrogation, existed outside every measurement framework Bruce had spent 2 decades building. "Sir?" The voice came from behind him, quiet and controlled. Victor Stone materialized from the shadows near the secondary workstation, his cybernetic half-reflecting cave light in chrome fragments. "The encrypted message I sent. You got it 12 minutes after you transmitted." Bruce didn't turn from the screens. "Your routing was sloppy. I could trace it. But the regime couldn't. Not yet." Bruce pulled up a new analysis window, isolating the moment Saitama caught Clark's strike. "Tell me about the mother box test." Victor's human eye twitched. Brief, barely visible. "It was approved by Superman, standard dimensional research protocols. There's nothing standard about opening rifts you can't control. The parameters were sound. The box just... Victor paused, searching for language that could describe what had happened. It answered something. Some frequency we didn't transmit. And then he was here. Bruce froze the footage. Saitama's hand palm out, stopping a Kryptonian strike with the effort most people use to check their watch. Show me the readings from the moment of arrival. Victor's chrome hand interfaced directly with the Batcave systems. Data flooded the screens. Energy curves, dimensional harmonics, spatial distortion measurements. All of it spiked at the moment of breach, then flattened into a baseline that made no sense. There, Bruce said, pointing at a specific spike. That harmonic. It's not new God technology. No, it's not anything in our database. The box was reaching for something, and something reached back. Victor's voice carried an edge Bruce recognized. The sound of a man who'd helped create a problem he couldn't solve. I should have shut it down faster. You should have never run the test. Bruce's tone didn't rise. Didn't need to. But you're here now. That counts for something. Clark wants him contained. Diana wants him eliminated. Hal's running probability models on combat escalation. Victor pulled up a secondary feed showing regime tactical discussions. They're not asking questions. They're planning responses. Of course they are. Bruce finally turned from the screens. A variable they can't measure is a threat to the entire premise of the regime. Control requires classification. If they can't classify him, they'll destroy him to prove they can. The cave's ambient systems hummed. Somewhere in the darkness, equipment cycled through maintenance routines. Bruce studied Victor's expression, reading the conflict there. Loyalty to the regime's mission. Revulsion at its methods. The permanent tension of a man built from two incompatible halves. I need to talk to him, Bruce said. Saitama, before Clark does something irreversible. Victor's mechanical fingers drummed against his forearm. A nervous habit that survived the conversion to chrome. The surveillance grid has him tagged in the commercial district, browsing. He's been in 4 different stores in the last 20 minutes. What's he looking for? Food. Specifically anything on sale. Victor pulled up real-time footage. Saitama stood in a convenience store comparing prices on instant ramen packages with the focus most people reserved for life or death decisions. He tried to buy something at the first store. Didn't have compatible currency. Hasn't tried since. Bruce watched the man who'd humiliated Superman examine nutrition labels. Get me a location update every 2 minutes. And Victor, the regime will trace your communications eventually. I know. Make sure you know what that means. Victor's jaw tightened. I know what it means to watch a system fail and keep feeding it power anyway. I've known for 3 years. He paused. If you're going to approach him, you should know Clark's ordered a full tactical response team. Phantom Zone projectors. Kryptonite-enhanced restraints. They're treating him like a doomsday-level threat. He caught Clark's strike with one hand. Maybe they should. Or maybe that's exactly why you need to talk to him first. Victor's image flickered, preparing to disconnect. The regime sees everything as a nail because all they have left is hammers. You're supposed to be better than that. The hologram dissolved. Bruce stared at the empty space where Victor had stood, then returned his attention to the screens. Saitama had put the ramen back. He was leaving the store now, hands in his pockets expression, carrying the universal frustration of someone lost in a foreign city without a map or money. Bruce made his decision. 20 minutes later, he intercepted Saitama 3 blocks from the commercial district in an alley that the surveillance grid had mysteriously lost visual coverage on. The approach was calculated. Not from shadows that would read as threat. Not in the bat suit that would read as regime. Just Bruce Wayne in dark civilian clothes, hands visible, posture carefully neutral. Saitama noticed him immediately. Stopped walking. Didn't adopt a stance, didn't tense. Just stood there with the patience of someone used to being interrupted. You're the one from the news feeds, Saitama said. The guy who disagrees with Superman. Bruce Wayne. He kept 10 feet of distance, non-threatening. I'd like to talk. About what? About how to get you home. That got a reaction. Not excitement, not hope. Just attention. Saitama's expression shifted from blank to marginally interested. The way someone might react to hearing their bus was only slightly delayed. You know how? No, but I have resources, technology, and an interest in solving problems that don't involve escalating violence. Bruce gestured toward a nondescript sedan parked at the alley's mouth. I have a facility. We can run diagnostic tests. Map your dimensional signature. Find the frequency that brought you here. Saitama studied him. The assessment was brief but thorough. What do you get out of it? Honest question. Bruce gave an honest answer. Information. And maybe preventing a war. Nobody wins. The Superman guy seemed pretty confident he'd win. He's confident about a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. Bruce took one measured step forward, still maintaining distance. The team that's coming for you in approximately 18 minutes won't ask questions. They'll use Phantom Zone technology, kryptonite-enhanced restraints, lethal force authorization if containment fails. Tried that already. Didn't work. They'll try harder, with more collateral damage. Bruce let that sit. I'm offering an alternative. Come with me. Let me run tests. If we can't find your way home, at least we'll understand what we're dealing with. Saitama's eyes narrowed slightly. And you get data on me in the process. Yes. The honesty seemed to register. Saitama looked at the sedan, then back at Bruce, then up at the sky like he was checking if the wrong dimension was still there. Will there be food? Bruce blinked. Of all the responses he'd modeled that hadn't made the list. Yes. Okay. Just like that. Saitama shrugged. I'm hungry. You're offering to help. Everyone else is trying to hit me or put me in boxes. He started walking toward the sedan. Also, I don't have anywhere else to be. Bruce fell into step beside him, carefully not showing his surprise. In 6 years of insurgency operations, he'd never acquired an asset this easily. Most recruits required persuasion, ideology, leverage. This man just wanted lunch and a way home. They drove in silence. Bruce had disabled the car's tracking systems, routing through paths that would read as normal traffic. When Saitama spoke, his tone was observational. Everyone's scared. The Superman guy acts like a cop, but worse. And you're hiding from your own side. It's complicated. People always say that when they don't want to admit something's messed up. Bruce's hands tightened on the wheel. There was an incident 5 years ago. Superman decided the world needed order more than freedom. Some of us didn't agree, and now you fight each other. Now we minimize damage while looking for solutions. Saitama processed this. Sounds exhausting. It is. The Batcave entrance revealed itself through a maintenance tunnel that officially didn't exist. Saitama looked around at the equipment, the displays, the weight of preparation. You really don't trust anyone, huh? I trust systems I control. That's not the same thing. Bruce didn't respond. It serves its purpose. Bruce led him toward the primary analysis platform, a circular space ringed with scanning equipment and monitoring stations. Stand in the center. I'll start with passive scans. You won't feel anything. Saitama walked to the mark, stood there, waited. Bruce activated the scanner array. Energy signature analysis, dimensional frequency mapping, biometric baseline. Every display returned the same result: null data. Error. Cannot classify. Different approach. Gravitational distortion. Temporal displacement. Quantum state analysis. Null, null, null. Saitama scratched his head. Is something supposed to be happening? The scanners are running. They're just not reading you. Bruce checked the diagnostics. Everything tested functional. It's like you're not interacting with the fields. Oh, that happens sometimes. People back home had the same problem. Saitama looked at the equipment with recognition. They eventually just stopped trying to measure me and started measuring everything around me instead. Bruce paused. Secondary resonance mapping, environmental distortion, the absence of data as data itself. He reconfigured the arrays. This time, results. Not readings of Saitama directly, but the space he occupied. Gravity bending, electromagnetic distortions, quantum probabilities collapsing wrong, a null zone in reality's measurement systems. You're not outside the framework, Bruce said. You're a hole in it. Is that good or bad? Unprecedented. He isolated resonance patterns, searching for matches to the mother box signature. The box opened a rift. You fell through. For that to work, there had to be a receiving frequency, something that matched what it reached for. I was just walking to the store. Something about you resonated, made you the path of least resistance when reality cracked. Saitama shrugged. People back home gave up trying to explain me. I'm just strong. Just strong. Bruce studied readouts suggesting localized reality editing and thought about power beyond explanation. I'm going to try mapping your dimensional origin. His tone stayed clinical. It might give us coordinates for a return rift. This will take a few minutes. Okay? Bruce initiated the deep scan. The arrays hummed, cycling through frequencies, searching for the harmonic signature of whatever universe had produced this anomaly. His secondary systems pinged. Encrypted message. Victor's routing signature. Bruce pulled it up on a private screen. Regime tactical team deployed. ETA to your last known location, 4 minutes. They're scanning for both of you now. Clark, personally authorized lethal force if containment fails. Bruce's jaw tightened. He'd bought maybe 20 minutes. Not enough for a complete scan, not enough to find a way home. He made a decision. The kind that defined the difference between principle and survival. The scan needs more time, he said to Saitama. But we have a problem. The regime knows you're with me. They're coming. Saitama looked up from examining a nearby workstation. The Superman guy. His team, armed with technology specifically designed to contain threats like you. Like I said before, that didn't work. They'll escalate. Use weapons that damage the city trying to stop you. Bruce pulled up tactical overlays showing approach vectors. I can hide you here. The Batcave has defenses. But that turns this into a siege, and sieges end badly for everyone. Or you let me give you something. Bruce moved to a secured cabinet, entering a code that opened a hidden compartment. Inside sat a small device, matte black, roughly the size of a thumb drive. It's a beacon, low frequency. If I can map your dimensional signature completely, I can use this to calculate a reverse rift. But I need time the regime won't give us. Saitama looked at the device. You want to track me? Yes. No point lying. The beacon will tell me where you are. It'll also let me monitor your dimensional resonance remotely. Finish the scan without you needing to be here. And if I say no, then I delete the scan data and you walk out that entrance before the regime arrives. No obligations. Bruce held the beacon out. I'm offering information, not asking for trust. Saitama took the device, examined it. How do I carry it? There's an adhesive patch. It'll stick to skin or clothing. Waterproof, impact resistant. Will it explode or anything? The question was so matter-of-fact it took Bruce a moment to respond. No, it's just a tracker. Okay. Saitama pressed the beacon against his forearm. It adhered, blending almost invisibly against his skin. So now what? Now you leave. The northern exit leads to the industrial district. You'll blend in better there. And you? I'll delay the regime. Give you time to disappear. Bruce pulled up the cave security feeds. 3 minutes until tactical team arrival. They're looking for both of us. Finding one will satisfy them temporarily. Saitama frowned. They'll arrest you. They'll try. I've been arrested before. It's manageable. That seems like a bad deal for you. I've made worse. Bruce gestured toward the northern tunnel. Go. Now. Before I change my mind about which of us is the bigger threat to stable operations. Saitama walked toward the tunnel, stopped at the entrance, looked back. The food thing you mentioned, rain check. Despite everything, the tactical situation, the regime closing, and the fundamental uncertainty of dealing with a dimensional refugee who treated apocalyptic scenarios like minor inconveniences. Bruce almost smiled. Rain check. Saitama nodded and disappeared into the tunnel. Bruce sealed the entrance. The beacon transmitted. Clean signal. The dimensional scan 40% complete. Not enough. But something. Proximity alarms triggered. The regime was here. He deleted Saitama's visual presence from cave surveillance. Encrypted the scan data. Activated defensive protocols. Then he stood in the center of the analysis platform and waited. Diana crashed through the northern entrance with regime enforcers behind her. She found Bruce exactly where he wanted to be found. Alone, unresisting, and absolutely refusing to explain where his guest had gone. The interrogation room was designed to be unpleasant without crossing into cruelty. White walls, single chair, overhead light that never changed intensity. Bruce had been sitting in it for 6 hours. He'd counted the ventilation cycles, mapped the surveillance coverage, calculated how long before someone would actually talk to him instead of leaving him to marinate in isolation. The door opened. Clark entered alone. No guards, no Diana with her righteous certainty, just Superman carrying the weight of absolute authority like it was oxygen. Where is he? No preamble, no pretense this was anything but interrogation. Bruce didn't move from his relaxed posture. You'll need to be more specific. The dimensional refugee. The man who humiliated my forces in front of 300 civilians. The variable you helped escape regime custody. Clark's tone stayed level. Perfectly controlled. Where is he? I don't know. You're lying. I'm factual. Bruce met his gaze without flinching. I helped him leave the Batcave. Where he went after that is his business. Clark's jaw tightened, barely visible. The kind of tell that took decades of partnership to read. You understand the threat he represents. I understand you can't measure him. That's not the same thing. A variable we can't classify as a threat to stability. Stability through control, control through force, force through fear. Bruce's voice stayed flat, clinical. You've built a system that can't tolerate anything it doesn't understand. That's not strength, Clark. That's fragility. The air pressure changed. Subtle. The kind of shift that happened when a Kryptonian's patience wore thin. Clark took one step closer. Not aggressive, just present. I'm trying to keep 8 billion people alive. That requires certainty, order. When something exists outside that order, you eliminate it. I contain it. Is there a difference anymore? Clark's expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes went colder. This isn't philosophy, Bruce. This is operational security. A being powerful enough to redirect my strikes, immune to our containment protocols, with unknown intentions and unknown limits. Every hour he remains unaccounted for is a risk I can't accept. So you'll hunt him. Escalate. Use weapons that turn Metropolis into a war zone, trying to stop someone who just wants to go home, if necessary. The honesty was almost worse than the threat. Bruce had known Clark for 20 years, fought beside him, trusted him with secrets no one else knew. This version wearing Clark's face spoke like a man who'd forgotten the difference between protection and domination. I won't help you find him, Bruce said. I know. That's why you're here. Clark gestured at the room, the walls, the entire apparatus of imprisonment. You'll stay in regime custody until he surfaces, or until you decide cooperation serves everyone's interests better than principle. House arrest with a view, very civilized. I don't want to fight you, Bruce. Then stop building systems that require fighting. Clark turned to leave, paused at the door. The beacon you planted on him. You think I don't know about your contingencies? I've been scanning for tracking signals since the moment Diana recovered you. Nothing. Either you're better at hiding tech than I give you credit for, or you already found it and discarded it. Bruce said nothing. Let the silence work. Or, Clark continued, it's using a frequency I can't detect, which brings us back to the same problem. Variables outside the framework. He looked back. When he surfaces again, and he will, I'm authorized to use Phantom Zone Exile. Permanent displacement, no trial, no appeals, just removal. You mean murder without the blood? I mean necessity. Clark opened the door. Think about that while you're here. Think about whether your principles are worth the chaos he'll cause. The door closed. Bruce sat in the silence, listening to ventilation cycles, and thought about the beacon transmitting data on a frequency the regime couldn't hear. About Saitama wandering somewhere in Metropolis, probably looking for food completely unaware, he'd become the focal point for an authoritarian state's existential crisis. About the scan data, 40% complete, encrypted behind 7 layers of security. Clark's people would crack eventually. And about whether the difference between saving someone and using them was really as clear as he'd always told himself. 18 hours later, in an industrial district on Metropolis's eastern edge, Saitama discovered that currency incompatibility extended to vending machines. He'd been walking. No destination, no plan. Just movement because standing still felt wrong when you didn't know where you were. The city at night looked different than the daytime showcase the Superman guy had staged. Quieter. More honest about its fear. Drones patrolled overhead. Surveillance nodes tracked movement. But this far from downtown, the regime's presence felt more like background radiation than active threat. The vending machine stood outside a closed factory old model, probably hadn't been serviced in months. Saitama examined the coin slot, the crumpled bills he'd found in an alley trash bin, and the chocolate bar behind glass that represented the first food he'd seen in 36 hours. The money didn't fit. Figures, he said to no one. Sir! The voice came from above, mechanical, flat. A regime drone descended to eye-level rotors, barely audible. You are Saitama, unregistered metahuman. Regime protocol requires immediate containment. Do not resist. Saitama looked at the drone, at the chocolate bar, at the drone again. I'm just trying to get something to eat. Compliance is mandatory. Resistance will be met with escalating force. 3 more drones dropped from patrol altitude. Then 6. Then a dozen. They formed a perimeter weapon systems, activating with synchronized precision. Professional. Rehearsed. The kind of response you got when someone had written very specific protocols about what to do if the dimensional refugee appeared. A transport vehicle rounded the corner. Heavy armor. Kryptonite-reinforced plating. The rear doors opened, revealing a Phantom Zone projector mounted on a stabilized platform. Hal Jordan stepped out, construct armor already forming. His expression carried the weight of someone who knew this was a bad idea, but had orders. Saitama, I'm authorized to bring you into regime custody. Cooperate, and this doesn't have to escalate. Saitama glanced at the projector, at the drones, at Hal's constructs building geometric prison walls in the air. The Batman guy said you'd try this. Batman's in custody. He can't help you. Hal's voice stayed professional, not hostile, just factual. The Phantom Zone is dimensional exile. You'll be placed in a containment field designed for Kryptonian prisoners. It's not permanent, just until we figure out what you are. I'm someone who wants to go home. Then let us scan you properly. Run full diagnostics. Map your capabilities. Give us the data we need to control me. The words hung there. Simple. Accurate. Hal's expression flickered. Brief uncertainty before professional calm reasserted itself. To understand the threat profile. I'm not a threat. I'm lost. Saitama's tone didn't rise, didn't sharpen, just stated facts. Everyone keeps trying to hit me or lock me up instead of actually helping. Because you're an unknown. Unknowns are dangerous. Only if you make them that way. Hal's constructs tightened. The drone's targeting lasers painted red dots across Saitama's chest. The Phantom Zone projector hummed building charge. Last chance, Hal said. Walk into the transport voluntarily or we do this the hard way. Saitama looked at him. At the dozen drones. At the massive projector designed to tear holes in reality. At the entire apparatus of an authoritarian state convinced that force was the only language worth speaking. Okay, he said. Hal blinked. Okay. Yeah, let's get this over with. The projector fired. Reality split. The Phantom Zone didn't open so much as impose itself a dimension, designed to be prison manifesting through technology that bent space into shapes it shouldn't hold. The beam hit Saitama's center mass and stopped, not reflected, not absorbed, just stopped. The Phantom Zone's dimensional anchor tried to latch onto his energy signature to tag him with the identification markers that would drag him into exile. It couldn't find anything to anchor to. The projector screamed warnings, overload alerts, system failure cascades. The beam intensified, trying to force compliance through sheer power. And Saitama stood in the middle of it, looking mildly annoyed. This is the same thing as before, he said. His voice carried over the projector's whine. The Batman guy's scanners couldn't read me either. Why do you think this would work? Hal's constructs wavered. That's impossible. The Phantom Zone anchors to dimensional coordinates. Everyone has coordinates. Apparently not. Saitama looked at the beam like it was rain he'd forgotten an umbrella for. Can we stop now? This is getting loud. The projector's power core hit critical. Safeguards engaged. The beam cut out, and the Phantom Zone snapped closed like a wound healing wrong. Silence. Hal stared. The drone's targeting systems cycled through threat assessments and returned nothing useful. The transport crew stayed inside their armored vehicle, probably reporting to someone higher up the chain that the plan had failed spectacularly. Saitama took a step forward. Every drone fired. Stunners, foam rounds, electromagnetic pulse emitters, the full spectrum of non-lethal deterrents. Everything hit and bounced off, and Saitama kept walking. Sir, one of the drone's voices cracked with synthesized uncertainty. Escalating to lethal authorization. Step back or... Saitama took another step, not toward the drones. Not aggressive. Just moving because standing still in the middle of a failed arrest felt awkward. His foot came down, serious weight behind it, not angry weight, just the weight of someone who'd had enough, and the pavement cracked. The fissure spread. Drones wobbled in sudden turbulence. The transport vehicle's stabilizers screamed, trying to compensate. Hal's constructs flickered as concentration broke. And from that crack, something else pushed through. Not from the Phantom Zone. From somewhere deeper. The air turned red at the edges. Not light. Something else wearing red like a color. The temperature didn't drop or rise, but everyone suddenly felt colder anyway. A whisper that wasn't sound. Pressure that wasn't physical. The sense of something vast and patient, becoming aware that reality had just developed a weak spot. Hal's ring flared warnings. What is that? Saitama looked at the red bleeding into the air and frowned. Don't know. But it feels wrong. The Phantom Zone projector's residual energy was interacting with whatever the red thing was. Dimensional frequencies interfering. The crack in the pavement glowed faint crimson, and for just a moment brief enough to doubt you'd seen it, something that might have been an eye looked through. Then it closed. The red faded. The pressure vanished. Everything returned to normal, except for the certainty that normal had just become very fragile. Hal lowered slowly to the ground, constructs dissolving. His face had gone pale. That wasn't you. No, but you made it possible. The Phantom Zone beam. The dimensional stress. Something used that weakness to... He stopped, reached for his comm. Regime Command, this is Jordan. We have a situation. Potential dimensional breach. Location transmitting. I need... The comm went dead. Not jammed. Just dead. Like something had reached through the signal and pinched it closed. Saitama and Hal stood in the industrial district, surrounded by disabled drones and failing equipment, and looked at each other with the universal expression of people who'd just made a situation much worse. The Batman guy mentioned you use a lot of force, Saitama said. Standard containment protocols. Maybe try different protocols. This one seems bad. Before Hal could respond, his ring screamed proximity alerts. 6 signatures incoming. Fast. The regime's heavy response team. Diana leading no doubt with authorization to stop caring about property damage. Hal looked at Saitama. At the fading crack where red had pushed through. At the choice between following orders and following sense. Go, he said. What? Go. Now, before they get here, and someone does something that makes this worse. Hal's constructs reformed, but differently. Walls facing outward. Barriers that would slow pursuit, not contain a target. I'll tell them you overpowered me, disappeared into the industrial sector. They'll believe it. Why? Because I just saw something try to use our fight as a doorway. And I'm betting Superman's escalation protocols won't stop to ask if making you angry is helping that thing push through. Hal pointed toward the factory district's deeper maze. Go. Stay away from regime forces, and if you see red again, run. Saitama studied him for a moment, then nodded and took off at a speed that didn't look fast, but covered 3 blocks in seconds anyway. Hal watched him disappear, then turned to face the incoming signatures. Diana would be furious. Clark would demand answers. The whole apparatus of the regime would bear down on his decision to let a high-value target escape. But he'd seen that eye in the crack. Felt something ancient and hungry testing the barriers. And he'd realized that maybe the biggest threat wasn't the man who couldn't be contained. It was what they were letting in by trying so hard to contain him. Diana landed with enough force to crater pavement. Her expression promised violence. Where is he? Hal gestured vaguely east. Overpowered the containment team. Disabled the drones. Went that way. The lie came easy. Easier than it should have. Diana's eyes narrowed. She knew him well enough to sense dishonesty. But the evidence supported his story. Failed equipment, scattered response team, and something else, a residual wrongness in the air, that her warrior instincts recognized as threat. What happened to the zone projector? He walked through it, like it wasn't there. That's impossible. Apparently not. Hal pulled up the projector's logs on a construct display. The anchor couldn't find dimensional coordinates. It's like trying to exile empty space. Diana examined the data. Her jaw set in the expression that meant she was about to recommend escalation to terminal levels. Clark needs to see this, too. There's something else. Hal pulled up the moment of red. Enhanced. Isolated. The eye that almost was. This happened during the projection attempt. Some kind of dimensional bleed-through. Only lasted seconds, but it was there. Diana's hand moved to her sword. Instinct. We need to contain this before it spreads. Contain what him? Or whatever's watching us, try to contain him. Diana looked at him. Really looked. Saw something in his expression that made her recalculate. What are you not telling me? I'm telling you we might be fighting the wrong threat. Hal dismissed the constructs, let his exhaustion show. I'm telling you that man isn't hostile. He's inconvenient. There's a difference. Inconvenience that broke our containment, disabled our forces, and apparently weakened dimensional barriers enough for something else to peek through. Inconvenience we created by treating him like an enemy instead of someone who needs help getting home. Diana's expression hardened. That's not your call to make. I know. Hal looked east where Saitama had vanished into the factory district. But maybe it should be someone's. He didn't say what he was thinking. That Clark's certainty was becoming tyranny. That Diana's loyalty was becoming complicity. That the regime had built a system so rigid it would break before it bent. That maybe the man in the yellow cape wasn't the problem. Maybe they were. Diana ordered a full-spectrum sweep of the industrial district. Deployed tactical teams, set perimeter protocols, did everything the system required when a high-value target escaped. But she kept thinking about the red in the data logs, about the eye that had looked through dimensions like checking on livestock, and she wondered just for a moment, quickly suppressed, if Hal was right. If the biggest danger wasn't the variable they couldn't control, it was what happened when they kept trying. The mother box woke screaming. 3 levels beneath the regime compound in the vault that smelled like burnt metal and institutional paranoia, the cube's surface erupted with symbols that cycled too fast for human comprehension. Victor Stone's cybernetic systems interpreted maybe one word in 50. The rest was new god language, ancient and angry. His screens flooded with alerts, dimensional harmonics spiking, energy readings that shouldn't exist outside apocalypse itself. And underneath it all, a frequency that felt less like technology and more like recognition. The box wasn't malfunctioning. It was calling home. Victor reached for the emergency shutdown. But before his chrome fingers touched the console, the box tore reality open. Not like before. Not the careful, contained rift that had pulled Saitama through. This was a wound. Space folded wrong, bleeding colors that hurt to process, and through the gap came a sound like continents grinding together. The boom tube stabilized, and Darkseid stepped through into Earth's atmosphere. He didn't fall, didn't descend, just existed suddenly above Metropolis, a figure carved from stone and malice, eyes burning red with the kind of patience that measured time in the depths of civilizations. His voice carried across every frequency, analog and digital, a broadcast that bypassed technology and spoke directly to the certainty that something vast had noticed you. This world abuses the gifts of apocalypse. The regime's surveillance network lit up. Every sensor, every alert. Brother Eye's threat assessment algorithms tried to quantify what they were seeing and return numbers that made no sense. Clark was in the regime command center when the alerts hit. He read the preliminary data, looked at the visual feeds, showing Darkseid floating above the city, like judgment made manifest, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 6 years. Not fear. He'd excised that, along with doubt and hesitation, but recognition. Of a threat that didn't care about authority or order. That existed so far beyond the frameworks of control that fighting it would be less like warfare and more like weather. All units, he said, voice carrying across every regime channel. Apocalypse incursion, lethal force authorized. This is not containment. This is war. Diana was already airborne, sword-drawn expression, carrying the anticipation of violence that needed no justification. Hal manifested beside her, constructs forming weapons platforms that could level city blocks. But Clark looked at the readings and knew something they didn't. Darkseid hadn't come for conquest. Not yet. This was investigation, punishment for the Mother Box's abuse. A reminder that new God technology answered to new God authority, which meant Darkseid would take what he came for and leave, unless someone gave him a reason to stay. Clark flew toward the confrontation anyway, because that's what power required. Presence, response, the illusion of control even when control was fiction. Saitama was 4 blocks from a convenience store that accepted scavenged currency when the sky tore open. He looked up at the massive figure hovering in the afternoon light, at the geometric tunnel of impossible space behind him, and felt the same mild annoyance he'd experienced when his apartment's hot water stopped working. "Great," he said. "Another one." The air pressure changed, not from Darkseid, from something else. Saitama turned and saw them coming. Parademons. Hundreds of them, pouring through the boom tube in formations that suggested intelligence carrying weapons designed to crack bunkers and shred armor. They screamed in voices that shouldn't come from throats, diving toward the city in waves of teeth and fury. Civilians ran, screamed, scattered like they'd been trained to do when the sky started bleeding nightmares. Saitama watched a parademon dive toward a woman clutching two children's claws extended and made a decision. He jumped. The leap took him 300 feet up in a blink. The parademon saw him coming, tried to veer, and caught Saitama's fist in its center mass. The impact made a sound, like a steel door slamming. The parademon folded around the strike, went tumbling through 6 more of its kind, and they all crashed into a building facade hard enough to crater concrete. Saitama landed on a rooftop, looked at his fist, at the swarm of parademons that had noticed him now. "Okay," he said. "I guess we're doing this." They came at him like a living wall. Claws and teeth and weapons that could vaporize tanks. Saitama moved through them with the efficiency of someone swatting mosquitoes. No flourish, no excess motion. Just economical violence that left parademons falling from the sky in pieces. He didn't enjoy it, didn't hate it, just recognized it as the thing that needed doing right now so civilians could stop running. Clark arrived to find Saitama standing on a rooftop, surrounded by broken parademons, looking bored. "You?" Clark said, stopping 20 feet away. "Me," Saitama agreed. "This isn't your fight. They were attacking people. I was here." Seemed simple. Before Clark could respond, Omega beams lanced through the space between them. Twin streams of red energy that bent physics and rewrote matter at the molecular level. Clark dodged. Saitama didn't. The beams hit him and stopped. Not reflected, not absorbed. Just stopped like light hitting a surface that shouldn't exist. The energy dispersed into nothing, and Saitama looked at Darkseid with the expression of someone who'd been interrupted during lunch. "You are the anomaly," Darkseid said. "Not a question, an observation. The signature that echoes wrong. The box reached for you across dimensions because you exist as absence. Interesting. I'm just trying to get home. Home is irrelevant. You are a variable outside calculation. I collect such things." Darkseid's eyes glowed brighter. "You will serve Apocalypse or cease?" "Neither, thanks." Diana hit Darkseid from the right sword, cutting through trajectories designed to find weak points in stone skin. Hal struck from the left, constructs shaped like artillery that could punch through starship hulls. Clark came from above, fists leading, carrying the full force of Kryptonian strength behind the strike. Darkseid caught Diana's blade one-handed, shattered Hal's constructs with a glance, stopped Clark's punch with his palm. Then he threw them. Casual, contemptuous. 3 of Earth's most powerful beings scattered like debris, and Darkseid's attention never left Saitama. "You do not serve. You do not flee. What are you?" "Annoyed, mostly." The Omega beams fired again. This time not lances, but waves, reality-editing energy that could unmake matter itself. Saitama stood in the middle of it, hands in his pockets, and the beams couldn't find him to edit. Darkseid's expression shifted, barely visible. The universe's smallest acknowledgement of something unexpected. He moved, not flight. Apocalypse technology manifesting as speed that bypassed the space between points. One moment Darkseid was hovering the next. His fist was coming at Saitama's face with the force that cracked planets. Saitama leaned left. The punch missed by an inch. The shockwave behind it didn't. Buildings 3 blocks away lost windows. Parademons in the air tumbled from turbulence. The rooftop beneath them cracked into a spiderweb pattern. Darkseid pulled back. Recalculated. Struck again faster, harder, with the kind of force that required gods to measure. Saitama dodged. Not with skill, not with technique. Just with the basic competence of someone who'd spent 3 years training to fight beings beyond reason. He moved like he was avoiding puddles, and Darkseid's strikes, each one capable of orbital bombardment, hit nothing but air. Clark recovered in time to see it. To watch Darkseid, new god conqueror of 1,000 worlds, fail to land a hit on someone who wasn't even trying. "Impossible," Diana breathed beside him. "Apparently not." Hal said, constructs reforming with shaking hands. Saitama stopped dodging. Let Darkseid's next punch come. Raised his hand, not a block, just a placement, and caught the fist. The impact rippled outward. Windows throughout downtown shattered. Car alarms screamed. The rooftop they stood on collapsed into the building beneath, and they fell through 4 floors of office space in a rain of concrete and rebar. Saitama landed standing, still holding Darkseid's fist, still looking mildly put out by the whole situation. "This is getting destructive," he said. "Maybe we should stop." Darkseid's free hand came up, grabbing Saitama's throat. Stone fingers that could crush steel tightened. Omega energy channeled directly into flesh that shouldn't survive contact. Saitama looked at the hand choking him, then at Darkseid, then sighed. Okay, serious punch, I guess. He pulled his right fist back. Not far. Just enough. The motion was simple, obvious. The kind of telegraph that any competent fighter would exploit. Darkseid tried to dodge. Too late. Saitama punched, not at Darkseid, at the air beside him. The strike missed by a full 3 feet, and that saved Darkseid's existence. Because even missing, even with all that force redirected into empty space, the shockwave hit like compressed apocalypse. The air itself cracked. Not a metaphor. Actual fractures in atmosphere pressure differentials that shouldn't exist outside weapon testing, a physical manifestation of force without theoretical ceiling. The wave caught Darkseid sideways, spun him, threw him through the air like a brick in a hurricane. He hit the boom tube hard enough to make it wobble. The dimensional portal-stable technology that had survived since before Earth's formation buckled under the impact. Geometric patterns, meant to hold space-time in configuration, scrambled. The tunnel twisted, writhed, tried to compensate for variables its mathematics couldn't process. Darkseid recovered. Stabilized. His stone face carried an expression Earth had never seen. Not anger, not fury. Curiosity. "You are stronger than you appear," he said. Blood, if that's what new gods had trickled from his mouth. Interesting. Come to Apocalypse. Serve as my weapon, and I will grant you. No. You refuse. I refuse. Saitama's tone didn't change. Stayed at that same level of persistent disinterest. I don't want to serve anyone. I don't want to conquer anything. I just want to go home and forget this whole mess. Darkseid studied him. Calculating. Processing. Running probability matrices on whether forcing compliance was worth the resource expenditure. The boom tube pulsed. Unstable. The shockwave from Saitama's punch had damaged it structurally. Maintaining the portal was requiring active effort now, and effort meant vulnerability. Darkseid made his decision. You are beneath Apocalypse concern, he said. The lie was transparent, obvious. A retreat dressed as dismissal. This world abused the Mother Box. The debt is paid. We have no further business. He turned toward the boom tube, calling the parademons back through. They came in ragged formations, carrying their wounded, leaving Earth's airspace like locusts fleeing winter. But before entering the portal, Darkseid looked back. Not at Clark or Diana or the gathered might of the regime. At Saitama standing in rubble, looking like someone who'd missed a bus. You cannot return to your origin, Darkseid said. The dimensional resonance is wrong. You exist between frequencies now. Going home will require more than force. How do you know? Because Apocalypse deals in dimensional conquest. I recognize the signature of someone displaced outside their native reality. You are stranded. A pause. Permanently, unless someone with appropriate technology assists. And I'm guessing Apocalypse won't be helping. No, you humiliated me. That requires response, but not today. Today I acknowledge you as a variable beyond current acquisition cost. Darkseid's smile was the worst thing Saitama had seen in either dimension. I will wait. Watch. And when you are desperate enough, alone enough, broken enough by this world's fear of you, Then you will come to Apocalypse asking for the way home, and I will own you, Will. He entered the boom tube. It collapsed behind him, the portal folding space back into normal configuration. But wrong. The closure wasn't clean. The geometry stuttered. And in that stutter, in the fractional second where dimensional barriers were thin, something else pushed through. Red, not light, not gas, just red existing in spaces it shouldn't reach, testing the wound. Saitama's punch had made in the boom tube structure. It lasted less than a heartbeat, then vanished as reality reasserted itself. But everyone saw it. Diana landed beside Clark, sword still drawn, breathing hard from combat that never properly materialized. What was that? I don't know. At the industrial district, after the Phantom Zone attempt, Hal reported something similar. Clark pulled up the tactical feed, scanning backwards through the last 72 hours. Industrial district incident. Residual energy signature from failed zone projection. And they're brief enough to miss if you weren't looking that same wrong red, pushing through cracks in dimensional stability. Every time we try to contain him, Clark said slowly. Every time we stress dimensional barriers, trying to force compliance, something uses that stress. Watches through it. Then we need to stop stressing the barriers, or we need to eliminate the stress point. Clark looked at Saitama standing in wreckage, looking lost. One variable causing all this instability. Diana's grip tightened on her sword. Clark, I know what I'm saying. Before she could respond, Hal landed between them. His face was pale, drawn. The look of someone who'd seen the math and hated the answer. Did you see the red? He asked. We saw it. And you're still planning to escalate? I'm planning to restore order. By making the same mistake louder. Hal's constructs dissolved. Frustration, overwhelming discipline. Every containment attempt, every weapon we point at him, every time we crack dimensional barriers trying to force him into our framework, that thing gets closer. Can't you see the pattern? I see a threat we can't classify, making Earth vulnerable to dimensional incursion. You see what you want to see. Hal looked at Saitama, who was examining the rubble around him with the expression of someone who'd accidentally broken something expensive. He's not hostile, Clark. He's inconvenient. There's a difference. Inconvenience that damaged the boom tube, enough to let something else peek through. Inconvenience we created by treating him like an enemy instead of someone who needs help. Clark's jaw set. The expression that meant the conversation was over. Find him. Track him. Next time he surfaces, we use containment protocols that don't stress dimensional barriers. Localized suppression. Overwhelming force. No exotic technology. So just hitting harder, if necessary. Hal looked at Diana, hoping for support. Found only the same certainty that had driven the regime for 6 years. The belief that authority plus force equaled safety. He flew away without another word. Saitama had already left. Disappeared into the city's maze while the regime argued over what he meant. Gone before anyone could ask if Darkseid was right about the dimensional displacement being permanent. But he'd heard it, standing in an alley 6 blocks away, listening to his stomach growl. Saitama processed what the stone monster had said. Stranded. Permanently. Unless someone with appropriate technology helped. The Batman guy had technology. Had promised to help find a way home. But Batman was in regime custody now, arrested for the crime of not treating Saitama like a weapon to be controlled, which meant home was getting further away. And the regime was getting closer. Saitama looked at the beacon on his forearm. The small device Batman had given him. Still transmitting something. Still gathering data no one knew how to read yet. If he survived long enough for the scan to complete. If the regime didn't kill him, trying to contain him. If whatever that red thing was didn't use their violence as a doorway. He found a broken vending machine in the alley. Pried it open with minimal force. Retrieved a chocolate bar that had survived the parademon attack. The wrapper was dusty. The chocolate was probably stale. It tasted like giving up felt, somewhere in the regime command center. Clark watched surveillance feeds showing Saitama eating alone in an alley and felt something that almost resembled doubt. Almost. Then he suppressed it. Called another tactical meeting. Began planning containment protocols that wouldn't crack dimensional barriers, and absolutely refused to consider that maybe the problem wasn't the man who couldn't be contained. Maybe it was the people who kept insisting containment was the only option. The mother box, 3 levels beneath the compound, sat quiet in its vault. But its surface showed symbols that hadn't been there before. Warnings in the language of new gods. Symbols that translated roughly to door ajar. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, something red and patient and very old adjusted its grip on the crack it had been widening, waiting for the next time Earth's defenders mistook force for wisdom, waiting for the door to open just a little wider. The nightmares started 3 hours after the boom tube collapsed, not localized, not isolated to trauma victims or people with anxiety disorders. Everyone in Metropolis dreamed red that night. Office workers, children, the homeless sleeping in alleys. Even the regime enforcers on patrol rotation reported the same thing when their shifts ended, dreams of a voice that didn't speak, words of pressure building behind walls too thin to hold of something vast, adjusting its grip on reality's throat. By morning, the reports flooded regime networks. Collective hallucination, mass hysteria, dimensional bleed-through. Every analyst had a different theory. None of them mentioned the pattern everyone was seeing. Red. Always red. And a sense of being watched by something that measured time in civilizations. Victor Stone hadn't slept. His cybernetic half didn't require it, and his human half had learned that rest meant dreams. He stood in the vault staring at the mother box, watching symbols crawl across its surface in languages that predated Earth's formation. The box was still screaming. Quietly. A frequency most humans couldn't hear, but that Victor's systems translated into approximations of meaning. Warning, breach, contamination, door. Show me, he said to the empty vault. The box pulsed. Data flooded his neural interface. Energy readings from the boom tube collapse. Dimensional stress points. And there, threaded through everything, like infection through tissue, a signature that made his threat assessment protocols malfunction. It wasn't new god technology. It wasn't Kryptonian. It wasn't anything in Earth's database or Apocalypse's records. It was old. Older than the mother box. Older than the new gods themselves. And it was getting closer. Victor pulled the data, encrypted it, routed it through 7 proxy servers before sending it to the one person who might understand what it meant. The message reached the regime detention facility at 0400. Bruce Wayne received it on a smuggled device so small it could hide behind a molar. He read the data in darkness, in silence, and felt something he'd been suppressing for 6 years. Pure, undiluted fear. Not of the regime, not of Clark or Diana or the apparatus of control, of what was coming through the cracks they'd made trying to contain a variable they couldn't classify. He sent back 2 words, find Raven. Raven felt it before anyone told her. She was in Jump City when the wrongness hit. A small apartment rented under a false name, as far from regime attention as someone like her could get. The ward she'd built around the space protection, from scrying, from detection, from the voice that always called from the other side, shattered like glass. Her eyes snapped open, glowing, red bleeding into violet. The room was wrong. Walls too close, ceiling too low, shadows falling at angles that made geometry a lie. And underneath it all, a sound like breathing that came from nowhere and everywhere. She was out of bed, hands already forming containment glyphs before her conscious mind caught up to the threat. The voice came. Not through ears, through existence itself. Daughter? Raven's jaw clenched. No, the door weakens. I feel it from my prison. They break their reality trying to cage what cannot be caged. Every strike, every weapon, every desperate attempt to force order on chaos. The voice carried satisfaction like poison carries death. And you are there, my anchor, my key, my way through. I'm not your anything. The glyphs flared, burning through the air. Protection, rejection, the same wards she'd been building her entire life against the thing that wore her father's title. You are my daughter, my blood, my door. A pause, a sensation like massive hands pressing against thin fabric. And the door is opening. The walls rippled. Not physically. Reality itself flexed, testing how much pressure it could take before tearing. Raven's wards held, but barely. She could feel Trigon pushing not with force, but with inevitability. A tide that didn't need to crash to drown you. What do they call him? Trigon asked. Conversational, curious. The blank space, the null variable. The one who breaks their instruments by existing. Raven's hand steadied. You can't have him. I don't want him. I want what he creates. Every time they try to measure him, reality admits it has limits. Every time they try to contain him, dimensional barriers crack. He's not the door, daughter. He is the hammer they used to knock. The pressure increased. The apartment's walls groaned. Raven felt her wards beginning to fracture, felt Trigon's attention focusing, felt the inevitable pull of blood calling to blood. She made a decision. The wards collapsed inward, channeling energy not at Trigon, but at herself. Containment turned inward. Emotional suppression raised to levels that would break most people. She locked herself down, made her connection to her father as small and cold and dead as she could manage. The pressure stopped. Not gone. Never gone. Just waiting. You cannot hide forever, Trigon said. They will tear the barriers themselves. All I must do is wait. Then he was gone. Retreated. Left Raven standing in an apartment that looked normal, except for the scorch marks where wards had burned themselves out. She was packed and moving within 10 minutes, heading toward the one place she'd been avoiding for 3 years. Metropolis, where the regime was making everything worse by trying to make it better. Where Saitama was wandering unaware, he'd become the focal point of an apocalypse. Where her father was learning to push through cracks in reality every time someone pointed a weapon at a man who couldn't be threatened. Clark received the reports at 0600. Collective nightmares, dimensional anomaly readings, energy signatures that didn't match known threat profiles. And a recommendation from 3 separate departments: bring in occult specialists. Acknowledge this was beyond physical containment. He deleted the recommendations. Diana, he said into the comm, status on the Saitama search. Surveillance grid lost him after the Darkside encounter. He's avoiding cameras, staying in zones with degraded coverage. A pause. Clark, the dimensional readings are a symptom, not the cause. We eliminate the variable, the instability stops. And if it doesn't, then we escalate until it does. Diana's silence carried weight. Not disagreement. Not yet. But something close. There are other options. Hal suggested. Hal is compromised by sentiment. We can't afford sentiment. Another pause. Longer. Understood. The comm went dead. Clark stood alone in the command center, surrounded by screens showing a city that looked normal in daylight, but had dreamed red all night. He pulled up the footage of Saitama eating a chocolate bar in an alley, looking lost and tired and completely unaware of his role in destabilizing reality. One variable. That's all it took. One unclassifiable element to make 6 years of order start cracking. He made his decision. The kind that defined him now. The kind that turned protection into control and control into tyranny without ever admitting the transition. Authorize Project Terminus, he said to the tactical AI. Full suppression protocols, overwhelming conventional force, no exotic technology, no dimensional stress. Just eliminate the target. Confirmed to transform, the AI responded. Assembling strike teams, ETA to deployment 4 hours. Clark watched the screens. Watched Metropolis wake up to a morning that felt wrong in ways people couldn't articulate. watched surveillance footage of civilians looking at the sky like they expected it to crack. He told himself he was protecting them, told himself that force was the only language reality understood, told himself the red in everyone's dreams meant nothing. In an alley 12 blocks from regime headquarters, Saitama woke from a dream he couldn't quite remember. Something about doors, about pressure, about a voice asking if he understood what he'd become. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, looked at the beacon still transmitting on his forearm. The city felt different today, heavier, like atmosphere before a storm. People moved faster, looked over their shoulders, more avoided open spaces. Saitama stood stretched and tried to figure out where he could find breakfast that didn't require currency he didn't have. He didn't notice the red tint at the edge of his vision. Faint, almost invisible. Like someone had started painting the world a different color and stopped after the first brushstroke. He didn't notice the shadows falling slightly, wrong, slightly too long, slightly too eager to exist. He didn't notice reality beginning to fray at the seams. But Victor noticed. In the vault, watching the mother box pulse faster, symbols cycling into warnings that translated to door opening. Containment failure. Barrier collapse imminent. But Raven noticed. On a bus toward Metropolis, feeling every mile bring her closer to her father's attention, feeling the pull of blood and destiny and the inevitable weight of being someone's key, whether you wanted to be or not. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, in a prison built before Earth learned to measure time, Trigon smiled with a mouth that wasn't a mouth and pushed against barriers that weren't quite barriers anymore. The door wasn't open yet, but it was ajar, and every weapon the regime pointed at Saitama pushed it a little wider. The city didn't know. Couldn't know. Just felt the wrongness in their bones and called it stress, called it trauma, called it anything except what it was. But Sinwatma, the prelude to something old and patient and very hungry, finally getting to stretch after millennia of waiting. Metropolis went about its day. Regime drones patrolled. Tactical teams assembled. Clark authorized overwhelming force with the certainty of someone who'd never met a problem violence couldn't solve. And the temperature dropped 3 degrees across the entire city without anyone's instruments registering why. Because hell was learning to breathe through the cracks, and it was getting better at it every hour. The war room wasn't designed for cooperation. It was designed for command. 1 table, 1 chair at the head. Screens arranged so everyone could see the same data, draw the same conclusions, accept the same directives. But the data didn't support conclusions anymore. It supported panic. Clark stood at the head of the table, Diana to his right, Hal to his left. Victor's hologram occupied the far end, chrome face, impassive. And at the door, uninvited, but impossible to ignore, stood Kara Zor-El. She'd forced her way into the meeting. Not physically. She didn't need to. Just stood there with the expression that said she wasn't leaving until someone acknowledged that what they were doing wasn't working. The dimensional readings are accelerating, Victor said, pulling up overlays that showed Metropolis painted in warnings. Every hour the barrier between here and somewhere else gets thinner. Temperature anomalies, gravity fluctuations, reports of shadows moving independent of light sources. Hysteria, Diana said. Mass suggestion following the collective nightmare event. Hysteria doesn't register on quantum sensors. Victor isolated a data stream. This is real. Something is pushing through, using the stress points we created. Clark's jaw tightened. Then we eliminate the stress points. The stress point, Hal corrected, is our response to Saitama. Every containment attempt, every weapon, every time we crack dimensional barriers trying to force him into our framework. So we do nothing. Let an unclassifiable variable wander. Metropolis. I'm saying maybe the variable isn't the problem. Maybe we are. The temperature in the room dropped. Not metaphorically. Actual temperature. 3 degrees in 5 seconds. Frost formed on the edge of Victor's holographic projection. Everyone noticed. No one mentioned it. Project Terminus deploys in 90 minutes, Clark said, moving past the moment. Conventional force only, no exotic technology. We surround him, overwhelm him, remove him from the equation without stressing dimensional barriers. And if that fails, Kara's voice cut through from the doorway. If overwhelming force just makes things worse, what's the plan then? Clark studied her. Really studied her. Saw the challenge there, the doubt. The beginning of something he'd spent 6 years preventing, the fracturing of certainty. It won't fail. You don't know that. I know that order requires action. Hesitation creates vulnerability. Action without wisdom creates disasters. Kara stepped into the room properly. Not aggressive, just present. I've been watching the footage, reading the reports. Every time we escalate, something red pushes through. Every time we use force, the barriers get weaker. There's a pattern, Clark. You just don't want to see it. What I see is 8 billion people whose safety depends on eliminating threats I can classify. He's not a threat. He's lost. Kara pulled up her own data stream. Surveillance footage of Saitama over the past 72 hours. Look at him. He's not attacking, not conquering, not building power bases. He's looking for food, trying to stay away from us, hoping someone will help him get home, hoping doesn't change his threat profile. Maybe his threat profile is wrong. The silence that followed carried weight. Diana's hand moved toward her sword instinct, not intent. Hal's constructs flickered into existence, then dissolved as he caught himself. Victor's hologram froze, processing the moment. Clark's expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes went colder. You're questioning the regime's assessment. I'm questioning whether we're fighting the right enemy. Before Clark could respond, the displays erupted with alerts. Not warnings. Alarms. The kind that meant something had gone from bad to catastrophic without stopping at concerning. Victor pulled up the feed. Downtown. Hellscape manifestation. It's not pushing anymore. It's here. The footage showed a 6-block radius where reality had stopped pretending to be normal. Buildings stood, but their geometry was wrong, windows at angles that shouldn't exist. Walls that curved despite being straight doorways that led to spaces larger than the structures containing them. The sky above the zone had turned the color of old blood. And in the streets, shadows moved like living things, independent of any light source, testing their new environment. Civilians ran, screamed, tried to escape the zone and found the boundaries unclear. Some made it out, some didn't. And the ones who didn't started dreaming while standing, eyes open, but seeing somewhere else. Evacuation protocols, Clark ordered. Get everyone out of the affected area. Diana aerial perimeter, Hal hard light barriers at the boundary. Nobody goes in until we understand what we're facing. We know what we're facing. The voice came from the doorway. Not Kara this time. Raven stood there. Hooded, pale, eyes glowing faint violet that bled into red at the edges. She looked like she'd walked through exhaustion and come out the other side, into the clarity that came from accepting the inevitable. Who authorized your entry? Diana's hand went to her sword. No one. But unless you want that zone to spread across the entire city, you'll listen. Raven walked to the table, moved like every step cost her. That's not a dimensional anomaly. That's not a weapon. That's my father testing the locks. Clark studied her. Trigon. Yes? The entity from the occult threat assessments you ignored for 6 years because demons aren't rational threats that respond to force. Raven's tone carried no accusation, just exhausted fact. He's been in a dimensional prison since before Earth's formation. And you're giving him a way out. We're containing a variable. You're breaking reality, trying to cage someone who doesn't fit in your boxes. And every crack you make, Trigon uses. He's not pushing through. He's waiting for you to tear the door open yourselves. Victor's hologram leaned forward. The boom tube collapse, the phantom zone attempt. Every containment protocol, every single one created stress points, weak spots. Places where the barrier between here and there is thin enough for him to touch through. Raven pulled up her own data occult readings, dimensional harmonics, mapped to mystical frequencies. He doesn't need to break out. He just needs you to keep trying to contain Saitama until there's no barrier left. Hal turned to Clark. This is what I've been trying to tell you. And your solution is what do nothing, let an unclassifiable threat remain active. My solution is stop making it worse. Raven's eyes flared brighter. You can't contain Saitama. Your technology can't read him. Your weapons can't hurt him. Accept that, and he's just a lost person looking for help. Keep fighting it, and Trigon walks through the rubble of your certainty into a world you've made too weak to resist him. Diana stepped forward. You expect us to trust you, an occult practitioner with admitted connection to this entity? I expect you to trust basic cause and effect. You hit Saitama, barriers crack. Trigon pushes through. You hit harder. Barriers crack more. Trigon pushes harder. The equation isn't complicated. Then what do you propose? Raven's gaze moved to the screens showing the hellscape zone. The civilians still trapped inside, dreaming standing nightmares. The temperature readings dropping across the city. Close the door before it opens all the way. That zone downtown, that's an anchor point, where Trigon is focusing his attention. If we can sever his connection, they'll push him back, reinforce the barriers. How? Victor asked. Magic, technology, Kryptonian strength. I don't care, but it requires working together instead of fighting over jurisdiction while reality collapses. Raven turned to Clark. You want to protect the people? Actually protect them. Not from Saitama. From what you're letting in, trying to contain him. Clark stared at the hellscape footage. At shadows that moved wrong. At civilians trapped in waking nightmares. At evidence that his framework for understanding threats had become the threat. He made a decision. Not surrender, not acceptance. Just tactical adaptation. What do you need? Access to the mother box. Victor's dimensional mapping. Kara's strength for heavy lifting. And someone to keep Saitama away from the anchor point while we work. Why? Because if Trigon gets his attention, if he realizes Saitama is the one creating all these cracks, he'll stop using you as tools and start using Saitama directly. And I don't know what happens when an interdimensional demon tries to weaponize someone who breaks measurement systems by existing. Kara moved to the table, not asking permission, just acting. I'll handle the evacuation. Get the civilians out of the zone before you start sealing it. Alone, Diana's tone carried skepticism. Unless you'd rather debate chain of command while people dream themselves to death. Diana glanced at Clark. He nodded. One short gesture that cost him visible effort. Hal, Clark said. Perimeter containment. Nothing gets out of that zone. Victor, coordinate with Raven on the mother box integration. Diana. He paused, recalibrated. Find Saitama. Don't engage, just monitor. If he moves toward the hellscape, redirect him. Redirect how? Talk to him. He responds to reason, apparently. The words came hard, like admitting defeat. Tell him there's danger. Tell him we're handling it. Tell him whatever keeps him away from that zone. Diana's expression flickered. Surprise, brief, quickly masked. Understood. The meeting dissolved. Everyone moving to their assignments with the coordination that came from years of working together, even when working together meant swallowing doubt and acting on orders you weren't sure were right. Kara was the last to leave. She stopped at the door, glanced back at Clark, standing alone at the table, surrounded by monitors showing a city coming apart at the seams. This is the right call, she said. I know. Do you? Because from here it looks like you're accepting help from people you've spent 6 years calling threats to order. Clark didn't respond. Didn't need to. The screen spoke for him. Hellscape spreading, temperature dropping, shadows learning to move. Kara left him there. Flew toward the zone where reality had stopped being polite about its collapse. Where civilians needed someone strong enough to carry them and human enough to care about the cost. The war room stood empty. Temperature 3 degrees colder than when the meeting started. Frost forming on surfaces that shouldn't frost. And in the vault 3 levels down, the mother box pulsed warnings in languages Victor was beginning to understand. Anchor established, door opening, containment insufficient. But underneath that, another message. Quieter. Hopeful in the way machines could be hopeful when they saw humans finally making correct decisions. Cooperation detected. Recalculating survival probability. The number went from 3% to 8. Not good odds, but better than they'd been an hour ago. In the hellscape zone, Kara landed among civilians who'd stopped running. Their eyes were open, but unfocused, seeing things that weren't there yet, dreaming nightmares that smelled like sulfur and tasted like the moment before falling. She started pulling them out, one at a time, gentle as she could manage while moving at speeds that would break normal humans. Flying them to the perimeter, handing them to emergency services, going back for more. The shadows noticed. Watched with attention that felt like being studied by predators. But they didn't attack. Not yet. Just observed this Kryptonian moving through their territory with the audacity of someone who still thought strength mattered. Kara ignored them. Focused on the mission. Civilians first, philosophy later. She was carrying her 47th person to safety when she saw him. Saitama, standing at the edge of the hellscape boundary, looking at the zone with the expression of someone trying to figure out if they were responsible for this. Their eyes met. Kara saw doubt there. Confusion. The universal look of someone who'd become a problem without meaning to. She flew toward him, not fast, not aggressive, just direct. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I was just walking. Then this..." He gestured at the zone, at reality gone wrong. "Is this because of me?" Kara landed, studied his face, saw genuine concern there. Not guilt, not fear. Just the question of someone who'd spent 72 hours being blamed for everything and was starting to wonder if maybe they were right. "No," she said. The certainty in her voice surprised her. "This is because of how we've been treating you. There's a difference." Saitama met her eyes, held them, like he was trying to figure out if she meant it. "The others are trying to fix it," Kara continued. "Magic, technology, teamwork. But they need you to stay away while they work. Can you do that? What if it gets worse? Then we deal with it. But right now, the best thing you can do is let us handle this without..." She paused, chose her words carefully. "Without giving it more cracks to push through." Saitama nodded, slow, processing. "Okay, where should I go?" "Anywhere but here." She pulled out a comm unit. Civilian model. Untraceable. "Take this. If things change, I'll contact you. Otherwise, just stay low. Stay safe." He took the device, examined it like it was the first kindness anyone in this dimension had offered. "Thank you," he said. Then he was gone, moving at speeds that didn't look fast but covered distance anyway. Disappearing into the city's infrastructure like smoke. Kara watched him go. Turned back to the hellscape, to the civilians still trapped inside, to the work that mattered more than ideology or control or certainty. She went back to pulling people out of nightmares, one at a time, because that's what strength was supposed to be for. The anchor point sat in the center of the hellscape like a wound that refused to close. Raven stood at the edge of the containment perimeter, studying what Trigon had built while they'd been fighting over jurisdiction. Not a structure, not a portal. Something worse. A framework of possibility where reality had been convinced it didn't need to be real anymore. The air inside the zone tasted wrong. Copper and sulfur, and the moment before falling. Buildings stood at angles that made eyes hurt. Shadows pooled in corners that shouldn't have corners. And at the center, where the anchor pulsed with rhythms that predated heartbeats, space itself had begun to forget what separation meant. "There," she said, pointing. "That's where he's focused, where the barrier is thinnest." Victor's hologram materialized beside her, analyzing through sensors that kept reporting errors. "The dimensional membrane is at 17% structural integrity. At current degradation rate, complete collapse in 4 hours." "Less," Raven corrected. "He's learning, getting better at pushing through. Every minute he has access, he understands more about how this reality works, how to break it." Hal landed on her other side, constructs already forming scaffolding for the seal they'd planned. "Then we don't give him more minutes. We work fast." Kara descended from above, the last civilian cleared from the zone. Her suit was torn, face streaked with ash. She'd been carrying people for 3 hours straight, pulling them from nightmares that tried to hold on. "Zone's clear," she said. "What do you need?" Raven pulled the mother box from the containment case Victor had prepared. The cube pulsed in her hands, warm and anxious symbols cycling faster than before. It recognized what she was about to ask it to do. "The anchor is dimensional. Part here, part there, part in the space between. We can't destroy it with force. We have to convince reality it was never real." She met each of their eyes. Magic to identify the threads, technology to map them, Kryptonian strength to pull them, and precision timing, because if we miss even one strand, Trigon uses what's left to push through anyway. And if it works? Diana had joined them, sword drawn, despite knowing it was useless here. Old habits, combat instincts that didn't know what to do with threats you couldn't cut. "If it works, we sever his connection. Push him back. Reality remembers how to be solid." Raven didn't mention the cost. The psychic backlash of cutting ties to her father. The certainty that he wouldn't forgive this, that next time, and there would be a next time, he'd come for her specifically. "Some prices you paid anyway. And if it doesn't work," Victor asked, "then Metropolis becomes the first city in a very long chain of dominoes falling into hell." Clark hadn't joined them at the perimeter. He watched from regime headquarters, surrounded by tactical feeds and probability models that kept revising themselves downward. This wasn't his kind of fight. No enemies to hit, no authority to impose. Just cooperation between people he'd spent 6 years treating as variables to control. But he'd authorized it, given the order. Pulled back the forces that would have made everything worse. It would have to be enough. Raven stepped into the hellscape. The zone recognized her immediately. The air grew warmer. The shadows pressed closer. And from everywhere and nowhere, a voice that made reality flinch. "Daughter." She didn't respond. Just kept walking toward the anchor hands, already forming the glyphs that would let her see what normal eyes couldn't. Behind her, the others followed. Hal's constructs building framework. Victor's hologram projecting dimensional maps. Kara and Diana ready to provide force where force mattered. The anchor revealed itself in layers. First as geometry lines and angles that existed in more dimensions than 3. Then as connection threads reaching through space that wasn't space into a prison that wasn't quite a prison anymore. And finally, as attention, the focused will of something vast and patient that had been waiting millennia for exactly this moment. "You cannot seal what welcomes itself open," Trigon said. Not angry, almost amused. "Every strand you sever, I grow another. Every barrier you build, I learn to bypass. This realm is teaching me its rules. Soon I will know them better than it knows itself." Raven's hands moved through the glyphs. Identification patterns, containment matrices, the accumulated knowledge of every mystic who'd ever tried to keep something out that wanted in. "You talk too much," she said. The threads became visible. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Each one a point where Trigon's will intersected with Earth's reality. Each one a door that was slightly ajar. They pulsed with that wrong red light connecting the anchor to something on the other side that was learning to breathe. Victor mapped them, all of them. We miss one and I know. His hologram expanded, overlaying the threads with dimensional coordinates. Mapping. 70% complete. 80, 90 there. I have them. Hal's constructs shifted. No longer scaffolding, now scissors. Geometric shapes designed to cut at angles that didn't exist in normal space. Ready to sever on your mark. Kara Diana. When the threads break, the anchor structure will try to collapse inward. It'll pull hard. You need to pull harder. Yank the whole framework loose before it can reattach. Kara nodded. Diana's grip tightened on her sword, then loosened. Right tool for the job. Right now that meant her hands, not her weapon. Raven took a breath. This was going to hurt. Cutting connection to Trigon always hurt. But better pain than letting him through. Better her suffering than the world's. On 3, 1, 2. The anchor exploded. Not from their action, from Trigon's. He'd been waiting, learning, understanding that they would attempt this exact solution. And in the moment before they could execute it, he pushed, not gradually, not carefully, full force. Everything he'd been holding back, every fragment of will, he'd managed to slip through the cracks all at once. The hellscape expanded. Not 6 blocks anymore. 60. The sky cracked like glass. Buildings warped. And through the anchor, something vast began forcing its way into reality. Not all of Trigon. He couldn't fit. Not yet. But pieces, fragments, enough. A hand the size of a building materialized, grasping for purchase. Eyes opened in the sky, each one large enough to hold cities. And the voice stopped being a whisper, started being a presence. Too late, daughter. The door is open. This world is mine. Raven's glyphs shattered. The backlash hit her like voltage, and she dropped to her knees, bleeding from eyes and nose and places that shouldn't bleed. The connection she'd been trying to sever wasn't severing. It was strengthening, pulling her toward the anchor, toward her father, toward destiny. Kara caught her before she could fall completely. Raven, stay with us. Can't hold it. He's too strong. Victor's hologram flickered. The threads are multiplying. I can't map them fast enough. At current rate, full manifestation in 7 minutes. Hal threw up barriers. Constructs designed to hold back physical threats. They shattered against Trigon's presence like ice against fire. We need another plan. Now! Diana stared at the massive hand, forcing its way through reality. The eyes in the sky that saw everything and cared for nothing. Evidence that some threats were simply beyond mortal response. We need Saitama, she said. The words came hard, like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that 6 years of authority and control had led them to a moment where the only solution was the variable they'd spent all that time trying to eliminate. Clark heard it through the command feed. Sat in his headquarters, surrounded by screens showing Metropolis being consumed by hell, and made the hardest call of his life. He activated the civilian comm Kara had given Saitama. This is Superman, I need your help. 3 words he thought he'd never say to the man who'd humiliated him in front of 300 witnesses. 3 words that burned like acid, but necessary because pride couldn't stop apocalypse. Saitama had been sitting on a rooftop 12 blocks away, watching the sky crack and wondering if there was anything he could do that wouldn't make it worse. The comm crackled. This is Superman, I need your help. Saitama stood. What kind of help? There's an anchor. Center of the hellscape. Dimensional connection bringing something through. We tried to sever it. Failed. Now it's expanding and we're out of options. What do you want me to do? Clark's voice carried the weight of surrender. Break it. The anchor, the structure, whatever it is. Just break it before the door opens all the way. I thought you didn't want me breaking things. I was wrong. The words came quieter, harder. Will you help? Saitama surveyed the hellscape. The hand forcing through, the eyes in the sky. Evidence that this dimension's problems had escalated past politics into pure survival. Where's the anchor? Raven's voice cut in weak but focused. Center of the zone, where all the threads connect. You'll know it when you see it. Okay. Saitama stepped off the roof, fell 12 stories, landed without sound. I'm coming. He moved. Not the casual walk he'd been using. Not the careful speed that avoided drawing attention. Serious movement. The kind he used when something actually mattered. The hellscape recognized him as he entered. The shadows pulled back. The wrong geometry flickered uncertain. And Trigun's attention swiveled, focusing on this null space approaching his anchor point. The variable. Trigun's voice carried interest now. The blank. The one they fear because he exists outside their framework. You are why the door opened. Every time they tried to cage you, I used their violence as leverage. You are my unwitting tool. Yeah, I got that. Saitama kept walking. I'm not good at being careful. Things break around me. People keep trying to fix it by hitting me, which makes more things break. It's annoying. Join me. I can send you home, restore your dimension, give you anything you desire. Can you actually do that? Of course. You're lying. The sky's eyes blinked, surprised. How do you know? Because everyone who promises to help me get home wants something in return. Nobody who wants something is actually helping. They're just using a different cage. Saitama stopped at the anchor, studied the threads, the geometry, the wrong physics holding it together. I just want to go home, and you're in the way of these people helping me do that. They cannot help you. I am your only option. Maybe. But you're definitely making things worse right now. Saitama's expression shifted. Not angry, not determined, just done with complications. So I'm going to hit your anchor and you're going to leave. And maybe then someone can actually figure out how to send me back without turning it into a war. He pulled his fist back, not far. 6 inches. The motion was simple, obvious. The kind of telegraph any fighter would exploit, but there was weight behind it. Not physical weight. Intention. The accumulated frustration of 72 hours spent being blamed for existing, being attacked for walking, being treated as a problem instead of a person. Serious weight. Wait, Trigun started. Too late. Saitama punched the anchor. The impact didn't make sound at first. There was a moment of absolute silence, where physics held its breath, trying to decide if what just happened was allowed. Then reality made its decision. The anchor shattered. Not broke. Not cracked. Shattered. Every thread Trigun had built, every connection he'd forced through dimensional barriers, every fragment of will he'd manifested, all of it severed at once. The hand forcing through reality dissolved. The eyes in the sky closed. The hellscape itself recoiled, geometry snapping back to normal so fast that buildings groaned from the whiplash. And Trigun, ancient, patient, inevitable, Trigun was yanked backwards through the closing door like a fish on a hook. His voice screamed across dimensions. Not words, just rage and shock and the frustrated howl of something that had been certain of victory suddenly learning about variables outside its calculation. The door slammed shut. Reality held. The hellscape faded. Temperature rose. Shadows remembered they needed light sources. And Metropolis, 6 years into authoritarian control and 3 days into dimensional invasion, found itself back to just the normal amount of broken. Saitama stood in the center of what had been the anchor point, fist still extended, looking at his hand like he was checking if he'd hit too hard. Did that work? He asked. Raven collapsed. The connection to her father severed so abruptly, it felt like amputation. Victor's hologram stabilized sensors finally returning readings that made sense. Hal's constructs dissolved as the threat evaporated. Kara flew to Saitama, not fast, not aggressive, just relieved. It worked, she said. You closed the door. Good. He looked around at the zone that was rapidly returning to normal, at the civilians being treated by emergency services, at the regime forces that had held the perimeter and done nothing because for once, doing nothing had been the right call. Can I go now? Or is someone else going to try to arrest me? Diana landed nearby, sword sheathed, expression carrying something that might have been respect or might have been exhaustion. No arrest. You saved the city. I just hit something you told me to hit. You did what we couldn't. She paused, chose her words carefully. Thank you. Saitama nodded, started to leave. Wait. Clark's voice through the comm. The dimensional scan. Batman was running. It's at 92%. Another few hours and we might have coordinates for a return rift. Saitama stopped. There are no guarantees. But it's the best option we have. And in exchange you want what? Silence. Long enough to be uncomfortable. Then, nothing. You helped us. This is us helping you. No cages, no conditions. Saitama looked at the comm unit. At the city slowly recovering around him. At Kara, who'd been the first person in this dimension to treat him like a person instead of a problem. Okay, he said. Where do I wait? Anywhere safe. We'll contact you when the scan completes. The comm went silent. Saitama stood in the empty anchor point, surrounded by heroes who'd spent 3 days trying to contain him. And 5 hours learning that some variables couldn't be controlled, only accommodated. He glanced at Kara. Is there anywhere that sells hot pot in this dimension? He asked. I've been craving hot pot for 3 days, despite everything. The near apocalypse, the dimensional horror, the fundamental restructuring of how the regime understood threats. Kara laughed. Yeah, she said. I know a place. Come on. They left together. The Kryptonian who'd chosen to protect instead of control, and the dimensional refugee who just wanted soup. Behind them, the city began cleaning up. Emergency services moved in. Regime forces secured the zone. And in headquarters, Clark watched surveillance footage of Saitama leaving peacefully and felt the weight of certainty cracking. 6 years of authority. 3 days of learning that authority had limits. The lesson burned, but he'd learned it. In the vault, the mother box pulsed one final message before going dormant. Door closed, barrier stable, cooperation acceptable, and deep in the spaces between dimensions, in a prison that had held him for millennia. Trigon sat in darkness and planned. Not revenge, not rage. Patience, because doors that closed could be opened again. And next time he'd know exactly which variable to target. The one who could shatter anchors with a casual punch. The one this world feared because he existed outside their framework. The one who'd just proven himself worth waiting for. Saitama, the blank space that could break anything, even the bars of an infinite prison. The hot pot restaurant was empty except for them. Kara had chosen it deliberately. Small, off the surveillance grid's main routes. The kind of place that survived on regulars who knew not to ask questions when a Kryptonian walked in with a man in a cape who'd just closed a dimensional door with his fist. Saitama sat across from her watching broth bubble. Steam rose between them, carrying scents that almost smelled like home. Not quite. This dimension's ingredients were close but wrong in small ways, like everything else here. How does it work in your world? Kara asked. The hero thing, he shrugged. There's an association. You register, they rank you, you fight monsters. It's mostly bureaucracy with occasional punching. And people are okay with that. With heroes just existing. Some are, some aren't. There are always people who think we're making things worse just by being there. He picked up vegetables with chopsticks that looked tiny in his hands. But the monsters are real. Someone has to hit them. Kara studied him. This man who'd humiliated the regime closed hell's door and now sat eating soup like none of it mattered. Do you ever wonder if they're right? The people who think you make things worse, sometimes. He didn't look up from the pot. But wondering doesn't change what needs doing. Monsters don't stop being monsters because you're having a philosophical crisis. She almost laughed. Almost. Because he'd just summarized in 2 sentences what she'd spent 6 years trying to explain to Clark. The scan, she said. The one Batman was running. It's almost complete. Another hour, maybe 2. If it works, you could go home. If it works? If it works? Saitama nodded. Continued eating. Like the difference between stranded and home was just another variable he couldn't control, so why waste energy worrying? What will you do? He asked. After I'm gone, with them. He didn't need to specify who them was. Clark, Diana, the regime. The broken apparatus of control that had nearly destroyed the world, trying to cage someone it couldn't classify. I don't know, Kara admitted. Keep trying to remind them what strength is supposed to be for. Keep pulling people out of nightmares. Keep hoping they remember how to be heroes instead of just powerful. That sounds exhausting. It is. They ate in silence. Outside, the city was rebuilding. Emergency services clearing rubble from the hellscape zone. Regime forces maintaining perimeter security. Life returning to normal, or whatever passed for normal, in a world 6 years into authoritarian control. Kara's comm buzzed. She glanced at it. Message from Clark. War room, 30 minutes. Attendance mandatory. She silenced it. You should go, Saitama said. They can wait. The scan's almost done. They'll want to debrief. Figure out what happens next. He looked at her, actually looked not the usual glance. You helped me when no one else would. Thank you for that. Kara felt something crack in her chest. Not break, just shift. This man who could shatter dimensional anchors with casual punches, thanking her for basic decency. You're welcome, she said. For what it's worth, I hope the scan works. I hope you get home. Me too. The regime war room felt different now. Same table, same screens, same arrangement designed for command rather than cooperation. But the people around it had changed, even if they hadn't moved. Clark stood at the head, as always. Diana to his right sword, absent for the first time in days. Hal to his left constructs dormant, but ready. Victor's hologram occupied the far end. And Kara arrived last, taking a position that wasn't quite with them, wasn't quite against. The dimensional scan is at 98%, Victor reported. Completion estimated in 45 minutes. If the data is viable, we can calculate coordinates for a return rift. And the stability? Clark asked. Unknown. We're mapping a route back to a universe we've never accessed. The rift could hold for hours or collapse immediately. One way only, no guarantees. No. So we open a door, push him through, and hope it doesn't kill him in transit. Essentially, yes. The room absorbed that. This was their solution. Their best option. Send the variable home and hope reality didn't tear itself apart in the process. He saved the city, Kara said. Not loud, not challenging, just factual. Closed the door when we couldn't. And our thanks is shoving him through an unstable portal. Our thanks is giving him what he asked for, Clark replied. A way home. That's what he wanted from the beginning. He wanted help. Not a rushed exit because we're uncomfortable with variables we can't control. Kara, no. She stepped forward. Not aggressive, just present. I'm tired of watching us dress up fear as protection. He was never the threat. We were. Every containment attempt, every weapon, every time we chose force over conversation. We nearly ended the world because we couldn't accept that some things don't fit in our frameworks. Diana's hand moved toward where her sword usually hung. Found nothing. You're questioning. I'm questioning whether we learned anything. Kara looked at Clark. 3 days ago, you would have killed him rather than admit you couldn't control him. Today, you're helping him leave. That's progress. But tomorrow, what happens when the next variable appears? Do we make the same mistakes? Do we escalate until something worse than Trigon pushes through? The temperature in the room dropped, not supernaturally. just the cold that came from certainty meeting doubt. What would you have us do? Clark's voice stayed level, controlled. Accept that some threats can't be managed. I'd have you accept that not everything unknown is a threat. That power doesn't always require control. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you don't have all the answers. Silence. Hal's constructs flickered into existence. Brief, unconscious. Then dissolved as he caught himself. She's right. Diana turned to him. How? She's right, he repeated. I've been saying it for 3 days. Every escalation made things worse. Every weapon opened more cracks. We spent 6 years building a system that couldn't tolerate anything it didn't understand, and it nearly killed us. So we do nothing. Diana's tone carried the weight of 6 years defending decisions she had believed in. Let chaos reign because order requires difficult choices. I'm saying maybe our definition of order is the chaos. Hal looked at Clark. You asked me once why I stayed. Why I didn't just leave if I disagreed so much. I stayed because I thought I could change things from inside. But I was wrong. You can't change a system built on certainty by offering doubt. You have to break it and build something new. The words hung there. Not quite resignation. Not quite rebellion. Just exhausted honesty from someone who'd spent 3 days watching the world almost end because he'd been too loyal to speak louder. Victor's hologram shifted. The scan is complete. Coordinates locked. We have a viable route. Clark pulled up the data. Energy patterns, dimensional frequencies, a path through space that wasn't space back to a universe they'd accidentally violated. The math looked solid. The physics made sense. It would probably work. Probably. Prepare the portal, Clark said. Standard boom tube configuration. One-way transit. Notify Saitama we're ready when he is. Clark, Kara said. We should ask him. Not tell him. Ask if he's willing to risk it. Give him the choice. He'll say yes. He wants to go home. Then let him say it. Stop making decisions for people and calling it protection. Their eyes met. 6 years of arguments compressed into one look. Authority versus autonomy. Control versus trust. The fundamental divide that had turned Superman into something else. Clark's jaw tightened. Fine. Ask him. Explain the risks. Get his consent. The words came hard, like admitting defeat. And Kara, after he's gone, we're going to have a longer conversation about what the regime does next. Looking forward to it. She left the war room. Behind her, the architects of order stood in silence, processing what came next. How to rule when your certainty had cracked. How to maintain control when control had proven dangerous. How to be heroes when you'd forgotten what heroism meant. Kara found Saitama outside the hot pot restaurant, sitting on a bench looking at a sky that wasn't his. The scan's done, she said. We can open a portal. One way, probably stable. No guarantees it won't kill you in transit. He stood. Okay, that's it. No questions about probability, no concerns about the risk. I've been stuck here for 3 days. Attacked, arrested, used as a weapon, blamed for things I didn't do. Either the portal works and I go home, or it doesn't and I'm dead. Both options are better than staying. The bluntness hit her like a slap. He wasn't being dramatic, just honest. This world had been so hostile, so determined to treat him as a threat, that death looked preferable to another day here. I'm sorry, she said, for how we treated you, for making you feel like this. You didn't. You were the only one who helped. He looked at her. The rest of them, though. They should probably think about why someone would rather risk death than stay in their protection. He started walking toward the coordinates Victor had transmitted. Kara fell into step beside him. For what it's worth, she said, I hope your world appreciates you more than ours did. They mostly ignore me. It's better than this. They walked in silence through a city that didn't know it had been saved. Civilians going about their lives, unaware that 3 days ago, reality had almost given up on being real. Regime drones patrolling overhead, the apparatus of control maintaining itself unchanged by near apocalypse. At the portal site, Victor had assembled the equipment: mother box integration, dimensional anchors, boom tube projectors calibrated for one-way transit. The technology that had accidentally brought Saitama here now carefully configured to send him back. Clark stood nearby. Diana, Hal, the regime's core watching the variable prepare to exit their equation. The rift will stay open for 30 seconds, Victor explained. After that, it collapses. No second chances. The transit itself will take approximately 3 seconds. You'll feel disorientation, dimensional vertigo, possibly brief pain as your quantum signature realigns with your native reality. So jump through endure 3 seconds of weird hope I don't die. Essentially, yes. Saitama nodded. Looked at the assembled heroes one last time. You should probably fix your system. This whole control thing isn't working. Noted, Clark said. Flat, non-committal. And maybe next time someone falls through a hole into your dimension, try asking if they need help before trying to arrest them. Also noted. Saitama turned to Kara. Thanks for the hot pot. And for treating me like a person. You're welcome. Good luck. Victor activated the portal. The boom tube opened, tearing space in ways that made eyes hurt and physics cry. Through the gap, something that might have been another world waited. Different stars. Different sky. Home if the math was right. Saitama walked toward it. No hesitation. No dramatic goodbyes. Just a man who wanted to leave and finally had the chance. He stepped through. The portal collapsed. Reality sealed itself. And Metropolis, 6 years into authoritarian control and 3 days past dimensional invasion, found itself with one less variable to worry about. Clark watched the space where the portal had been. Scan confirmed successful transit. He's alive. He's home. Good, Kara said. Then quieter. Now what? Clark didn't answer. Didn't have an answer. The regime had been built on certainty. On the belief that power plus control equaled safety. 3 days had proven that wrong, and certainty didn't rebuild itself overnight. Now we adapt, he said finally. Learn. Make different mistakes instead of the same ones. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Kara looked at him. At Diana, whose grip on absent swords had become habit. At Hal, who had spoken truth and was still waiting to see if it cost him. At Victor, existing between human doubt and machine logic. At heroes who'd forgotten how to be heroic, standing in the wreckage of their certainty, trying to figure out what came next. Then I guess we start there, she said. The war room waited. Decisions needed making. Systems needed reforming. A world needed governing that had almost been lost to hell because its protectors couldn't tolerate being wrong. They walked back together. Not unified. Not certain. Just together. And in another dimension, Saitama landed in an alley 6 blocks from his apartment, looked around at a world that was his, and felt the weight of 3 days' lift. He checked his pockets, found money. Real money, the kind that worked in vending machines. The grocery store was still open, the sale was still running, and nobody tried to arrest him for existing. He bought his groceries, went home, made dinner. And if he thought about the dimension where heroes had forgotten what strength was, for where people dreamed in red and reality came loose at the seams, where one woman had offered kindness in a world built on control. Well, he thought about it while eating. Then he went to sleep. Some problems belonged to other universes. His just needed him to show up on time for Hero Association nonsense tomorrow. It was honestly an improvement. Bruce Wayne walked out of regime detention 74 hours after being arrested for helping a dimensional refugee. No trial, no charges, just a quiet release order signed by Superman himself, processed through channels that didn't officially exist. The kind of release that said more about shifting power dynamics than any legal proceeding could. Alfred waited with his car, didn't ask questions, didn't need to. 3 days in regime custody meant either you'd broken or they had. The drive to the Batcave was silent. Bruce descended into the cave's cool darkness, moved directly to the primary analysis station, and pulled up the beacon data. The tracker he'd placed on Saitama had transmitted continuously for 72 hours. Energy signatures, dimensional resonance patterns, environmental distortion fields. Everything the null variable had generated simply by existing in a reality that couldn't properly classify him. The scan had reached 100% 12 hours ago. Right before Saitama went home, Bruce stared at the complete data set. Years of work compressed into 3 days. A full dimensional profile of someone who existed outside every framework they'd built. Coordinates, frequencies, the exact signature needed to open a controlled rift back to Saitama's native universe. He could do it. Right now. Open a portal. Verify the transit had been successful. Maybe even establish a communication link for future dimensional travel. His finger hovered over the execute command. Victor's hologram materialized. You're not going to use it. Not a question, an observation. No, Bruce admitted. Why not you have what you wanted? Complete dimensional mapping, a way to access other universes. Strategic advantage. Bruce pulled up a secondary screen. The beacon's final transmission log. Location data from the moment Saitama stepped through the regime's portal. The tracker had tried to maintain connection across dimensional barriers. Failed. Burned out trying. The beacon itself was probably ash, now scattered across whatever alley Saitama had landed in. But in those final milliseconds before the connection died, it had transmitted one last burst of data. Confirmation. Successful transit. Subject alive. Subject home. And underneath that classification, still impossible. He doesn't belong in our frameworks, Bruce said. We spent 3 days proving that. Every attempt to measure him, contain him, control him, made things worse. And I was part of that. Built the systems, ran the tests, planted tracking devices on someone who just wanted to go home. You were trying to help. I was trying to gather intelligence while helping. There's a difference. Bruce initiated a deletion protocol. The data's valuable, strategic, could give us access to dimensional travel, military applications, scientific advancement. But using it means I learn nothing. Means I'm still treating everything as a variable to control instead of accepting that some things exist outside control. He watched the deletion bar fill. Saitama was right. Everyone who offered to help him wanted something. I wanted data. Clark wanted elimination. We all had agendas. And Kara, Bruce paused. Kara wanted to feed him hot pot and make sure he got home safely. She was the only one who treated him like a person instead of a problem. The deletion completed. 72 hours of dimensional data. Strategic advantage. Scientific breakthrough. Gone. Victor's hologram observed silently. You're going to tell Clark, Bruce said. I don't report to Clark anymore. As of 6 hours ago, I resigned from regime technical operations. That got Bruce's attention. Resigned. Officially pursuing independent research. Unofficially, I can't keep building tools for people who use them to make things worse. Victor's chrome face showed something that might have been exhaustion. I stayed because the technology was fascinating. Because the problems were interesting. Because I told myself I was just the engineer, not the architect of how it got used. And now I've seen what happens when you build a system that can't tolerate unknowns. You don't get safety, you get trigon. Victor pulled up data of his own. The mother box's final warnings. The dimensional stress points they'd created. I'm done building cages for things that don't fit in boxes. Bruce nodded, understanding. What will you do? Find Kara. Help her with whatever she's planning. Try to build something that doesn't require controlling everything. A pause. You. Same thing I've been doing for 6 years. Try to change the regime from inside. Fail. Try again. Bruce pulled up new screens, surveillance reports, regime operations, the apparatus of control maintaining itself despite near apocalypse. Someone has to keep trying, even when it doesn't work. Especially then. Victor's hologram faded, left Bruce alone in the cave with deleted data and the weight of choices that felt like failure, but might have been wisdom. He pulled up one final screen. Footage from the portal site. Saitama walking through without hesitation. The rift collapsing. A man choosing death over staying in their protection. Bruce had built contingencies for gods, aliens, metahumans, demons. Had plans to stop Superman if necessary, to contain Diana, to neutralize every threat on Earth and beyond. But he'd never built a plan for what to do when the biggest threat was the need to plan for everything. He closed the screens, sat in darkness, and for the first time in 6 years, wondered if he was fighting the right war. Kara found Diana on the watchtower's observation deck, staring at Earth below. "You've been here for 6 hours," Kara said. Diana didn't turn, thinking about whether Hal was right, whether the system we built is the chaos we were trying to prevent. Kara moved to stand beside her. Earth turned below them, blue and green and fragile. 6 billion people who didn't know they'd almost been consumed by hell because their protectors couldn't accept being wrong. "He was right," Kara said. "We spent 6 years building order that required force. Force that required fear. Fear that made everything a threat. And when something came along that didn't threaten us, just existed outside our ability to classify it, we nearly destroyed the world, trying to make it fit. So what do we do?" Diana's voice carried something Kara had never heard before. Uncertainty. "Abandon the regime. Let chaos reign, hope. People govern themselves better than we govern them." "I don't know. But I know what we've been doing isn't working." Order saved lives. Regime interventions stopped wars, prevented disasters. The numbers don't count the people who live in fear, who dream in red because we stress dimensional barriers trying to cage someone, who would rather risk death than stay in our protection. Kara turned to face her. Saitama said that. Said both options, going home or dying, were better than staying here. What does it say about us that someone would rather die than trust us? Diana's hand moved to her sword. Old habit. Reaching for certainty in the form of a weapon. But the weapon wasn't there. She'd left it in the armory after the hellscape. Not consciously. Just hadn't felt the need to carry it. "I thought we were doing the right thing," she said quietly. "Making hard choices so others didn't have to. Providing order so people could live without fear. We were. We are. But somewhere along the way, the order became more important than the people. The control became more important than the protection." Kara looked at Earth. "And I don't know how to fix that. But I know we have to try. Clark won't change. You know that. He's too invested, too certain. Maybe, but certainty can crack. It did crack. He admitted he was wrong, called Saitama for help. That's something. That's survival instinct, not change. It's a start." Kara pushed off from the railing. "I'm leaving the regime. Not permanently. Not dramatically. Just stepping back, taking time to remember what being a hero means before I forget completely." Diana absorbed that. "And if Clark objects, then he objects. I'm not asking permission. He could what? Fight me, imprison me, make me an enemy." Kara's voice softened. "Diana, we're already enemies. We've been enemies since we started treating dissent as betrayal. I'm just being honest about it." The observation deck stood silent. Earth turned. And 2 women who'd spent 6 years building order stared at evidence that order might have been the problem. "I won't join you," Diana said finally. "I still believe in what we're trying to do, the mission, the goals." "I know, but I'll think about what you said. About people dreaming in red. About someone choosing death over our protection. She looked at Kara. That has to mean something. It means we have work to do. Different work. Maybe opposing work. Kara moved toward the exit. But at least we're not pretending anymore. She left Diana there, watching Earth. Thinking about swords she'd stopped carrying and certainty she'd stopped feeling, and the slow, grinding realization that winning might not mean the same thing as being right. In the cave, Bruce received an encrypted message. Kara's rooting signature. Taking a break from the regime. Going to help people without checking if they fit the threat matrix first. Victor's with me. You should join us sometime. Remember what it's like to help instead of control. He didn't respond immediately. Sat with the message. Thought about deleted data and contingencies that made things worse, and systems that couldn't tolerate being wrong. Then he typed 3 words. Maybe I will. Sent it. Pulled up the regime's operational reports. Work that needed doing. Systems that needed monitoring. The endless task of trying to change something from inside that didn't want to be changed. But for the first time in 6 years, he thought about the alternative. About what it might mean to step outside the system instead of trying to fix it. About whether some cages needed escaping instead of reforming. The thought terrified him, which probably meant it was worth considering. Clark stood in the war room alone. Screens showed Metropolis rebuilding. Regime operations maintaining security. The apparatus of control functioning as designed. Everything normal, except nothing was normal. Hal had resigned. Victor had left. Kara was pulling back. Diana was questioning. Bruce was unreadable as always, but somehow different. The regime was fracturing, not collapsing, not failing, just fracturing. Cracks spreading through certainty, letting doubt seep in. He pulled up the tactical assessment. Threat levels, probability matrices, the frameworks that had guided 6 years of decisions. All of them had missed Saitama. All of them had escalated Trigon. All of them had failed to predict that the biggest danger was their response to danger. Clark closed the assessment, sat in silence, and for the first time since Metropolis burned, since Joker's bomb killed millions, since he decided the world needed someone strong enough to impose order. He wasn't certain anymore. The weight of that uncertainty was almost worse than the weight of certainty had been. Almost, but maybe somewhere in that uncertainty there was room to learn, room to adapt, room to remember that strength without wisdom was just force waiting to destroy what it meant to protect. Maybe. The screens glowed. The city rebuilt. And Superman sat alone with the knowledge that everything he'd built for 6 years might have been the problem he'd been trying to solve. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't change. It was just the beginning of realizing change might be necessary. And in a world that had spent 6 years pretending certainty was safety, that was something. 3 weeks later, Saitama stood in line at the supermarket, waiting while the person ahead argued about expired coupons. The fluorescent lights hummed. The floor was sticky. Someone's kid was crying in aisle 4. Everything was exactly as boring and frustrating and normal as it should be. He paid for groceries with money that worked. Walked home through streets where nobody tried to arrest him. Unlocked his apartment door without wondering if today would be the day someone decided he was too dangerous to exist. The hot pot he made didn't taste quite right. He'd been trying to recreate what Kara had ordered in that other dimension, but the ingredients here were different. Close but wrong in small ways, like remembering a dream that faded the more you tried to hold it. His phone buzzed. Hero Association notification. C-class threat in the shopping district. Mosquito Woman variant. Did he want the assignment? He declined. Someone else could handle mosquitoes. He'd had enough of being everyone's first call for problems they couldn't solve themselves. The apartment was quiet. Small. His. Nobody watching through surveillance grids. Nobody measuring his threat potential. Nobody building weapons to contain variables they couldn't classify. Just a man eating subpar hot pot in a dimension that had never asked him to save it from hell. He thought about Earth 49 sometimes. About red skies and wrong shadows. in a world so desperate for control it had nearly torn itself apart. About heroes who'd forgotten what heroism meant, and a system built on certainty that couldn't tolerate being wrong. About one woman who'd treated him like a person instead of a problem. He hoped she was okay. Hoped they all were. But mostly he was glad it wasn't his problem anymore. Some dimensions needed to fix themselves. On Earth, Mars Metropolis rebuilt. The hellscape zone had been cleared. Buildings repaired or demolished. Civilians relocated or compensated through regime bureaucracy that processed trauma like filing paperwork. Everything returning to normal, or close enough that people stopped having nightmares every night. Mostly in the Batcave. Bruce monitored systems that monitored systems. The same work, the same patterns. But something had shifted. He caught himself questioning frameworks more often, wondering if the contingency he was building made things safer or just gave him the illusion of control. He hadn't joined Kara yet, hadn't stepped outside the regime's apparatus, but he thought about it. Every day he thought about it a little more. Kara flew through Metropolis at dawn, pulling a family from a burning building. No regime authorization, no tactical coordination, just someone who saw smoke and responded because that's what strength was supposed to be for. Victor tracked her route through sensors he'd built years ago. Made sure she had the data she needed. Ran interference when regime systems tried to classify her actions as unauthorized intervention. It wasn't a revolution. Wasn't even organized resistance. Just two people remembering how to help without checking the threat matrix first. Diana stood watch on the watchtower, maintaining the perimeter, enforcing the peace. Her sword stayed in the armory. She told herself it was temporary, that she'd carry it again when the situation required. But situations kept not requiring it, and every day she didn't reach for the weapon felt like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Hal patrolled the sectors assigned to him, filed reports, maintained protocols. The perfect Green Lantern serving the regime's mission, but his constructs were different now. Less aggressive, more protective. Building barriers that kept people safe instead of contained. Nobody commented on the shift. Nobody needed to. Clark sat in the war room, surrounded by screens, showing a city that functioned, a world that obeyed an order that held. The numbers looked good. Crime down, compliance up, stability maintained. But he remembered Saitama's words. Both options, going home or dying, had been better than staying. And he wondered what it meant that the world he'd built for protection had become something people would rather die than trust. The question kept him awake. Not every night, but enough. Change didn't come in dramatic moments. Didn't arrive with fanfare or decisive turning points, just small shifts. Daily questions. The slow erosion of certainty by the persistent flow of doubt. The regime didn't collapse. The system didn't reform. Earth 49 continued exactly as it had, except for the hairline fractures spreading through its foundation. Invisible to surveillance. Undetectable by threat assessments. Just people starting to wonder if the protection they'd accepted was worth what they'd surrendered. In the vault, the mother box sat dormant, silent since the door had closed. But sometimes late at night, when no one was monitoring, its surface would pulse. Faint, brief. Symbols that cycled too fast to read. Warnings, perhaps, or just the universe's way of saying doors that close can open again. The temperature in Metropolis dropped 0.5 degrees. Nobody's instruments registered why. In the spaces between dimensions, Trigon waited. Patient, learning, planning the long game that demons played when they had eternity to work with. He'd learned about Earth 49 now. Understood its frameworks, its fears, its desperate need to control what it couldn't classify. And he'd learned about variables that existed outside frameworks, about blank spaces that could shatter anchors, about Saitama. Next time, and there would be a next time, he'd know exactly how to use what the regime had taught him, how to turn their certainty against them, how to make their need for control into the weapon that destroyed them. But not today. Today he simply waited. Breathed against barriers that had been weakened, tested locks that had been strained, and smiled in the darkness that preceded all endings. Because doors that closed could be opened, systems that fractured could be shattered, and worlds that had tasted hell once would taste it again. The only question was when. On Earth 49. The sun rose, people went to work, heroes maintained order. The regime governed with the certainty it had left. And nobody noticed the temperature dropping. Nobody felt the pressure building. Nobody saw the red at the edge of shadows, faint, as memory patient as time. The story didn't end. It just paused, waiting for the next crack to appear, the next variable to arrive, the next moment when power would face the limits of control. And in the space between ending and beginning, in the gap where certainty met doubt, Earth 49 lived. Broken, functioning, unchanged and forever changed, exactly as injustice intended. Saitama left the injustice world without monuments, slogans, or any tangible legacy. No cities were named after him. No new era began with his victory. True to his nature, he departed quietly, but that absence left behind a void the world could not ignore. In a world where power is everything, the existence of someone who could end every conflict yet chose not to shook the very ideological foundation of the regime. Superman was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. He was no longer the one who could dictate the rules of the game. Batman, in turn, found himself powerless before something he had never been able to plan for: absolute freedom of will. For people like Kara and Cyborg Saitama became living proof that power does not have to be paired with violence or the sacrifice of one's humanity. And for the world at large, he represented a failed moral test, not because he was wrong, but because the system itself had no answer for someone who did not want to rule. Saitama did not change the injustice world by fixing it. He changed it by exposing its limits. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.